The Mute at Hogwarts. Hey! Look who's back for more adventures. We love having you here to continue this story that keeps us all awake. Important note, all of this is pure fiction. So don't try any techniques you hear here in real life, your neighbor might call the cops. This amazing novel and all its rights belong to the original author. We're just the ones giving it voice and drama. Are you enjoying the show? Prove it by subscribing to our YouTube channel and leaving that like that motivates us so much. And if you want VIP access to exclusive content, our Patreon is waiting with things you won't find anywhere else. Chapter 51 The Greatest Wizard. That sounds pretty good. Joan has added a lot of points to the house, and she might even get another dragon, Ron said with a smile, earning a glare from Hermione. Of course, the others won't see it that way. We can't be too flamboyant for a while now. We need to keep a low profile and wait until this blows over, Hermione said. Harry nodded, agreeing that Hermione's words made perfect sense. Ron nodded too, even though he thought Hermione was usually the most flamboyant. He and Harry were usually very low-key, almost to the point of wanting the professors to forget about them. It would be best if Snape stopped asking Harry or the person next to him to answer questions. Guan Qiong, watching this scene, had a refreshed impression of Hermione. Although he knew from memory that Hermione would be the future Minister of Magic, he hadn't expected her to possess such strong mental fortitude and the ability to lead a team at such a young age. Even though there were only 2 children younger than her in the team. One could only say that, worthy of the future Minister of Magic, she was already much more capable than her peers even at a young age. Meanwhile, Parvati and Lavender arrived in the dining room, preparing for breakfast. The 2 women were Hermione's roommates and friends. They looked at Hermione, and she saw them too. The 3 of them seemed to freeze for a moment, but in the end, Parvati and Lavender remained seated a distance away, never glancing at Hermione. A hint of dejection crossed Hermione's face, the luster in her eyes dimming slightly as she silently continued to eat her breakfast. At that moment, she truly resembled a 12-year-old. For the rest of the day, the 3 of them maintained a low profile, making no unnecessary movements. As for Guan Qiong, he had always kept a low profile, so low that many people had forgotten there was a mute wizard in the school. After all, before Norma's arrival, Guan Qiong was either in the library or the room of requirement, rarely even in the Gryffindor common room. After Norma's departure, Guan Qiong returned to this routine, the only difference being that he performed better in class, earning Gryffindor House a good number of points. Hermione didn't raise her hand to answer questions in every class as she had before, but she put in a lot of effort on her homework, earning her a few points. Only Harry and Ron were unsure what to do. They even discussed asking Filch to give them extra points for cleaning the trophies on the 3rd floor. But then they remembered that Filch was only an administrator, with the power to punish, not to award points, so they gave up. Defense against the dark arts class. Quirrell, as usual, lectured in his halting, almost garbled language. The students were busy with their own things, no one paying attention. The same thing happened with Gwen. Today's class was about a magical creature called the Lamora Stone. He had already read and memorized the information and was waiting for the get-out-of-class to end. When the bell rang, the students skillfully gathered their things, and Gwen did the same. He was going to go to the library with Hermione to review. Hermione would review the lessons for the semester, while he would review the history of magic he had read recently. He had read so much lately that things were a bit disorganized, and he needed to sort it out. It would be best if he could build a memory palace in his mind. Just as he was about to leave, a voice called him. Guan Qiong, please, stay, for a moment, Quirrell stuttered, but his meaning came through. Qiong was startled, her expression unchanged as she looked over. Quirrell's face was even paler than before. If he had looked ghostly before, now he looked more like a dead ghost. Even the winter snow wasn't as pale as he was now. It was amazing that, even though he looked so weak that he could collapse at any moment, he had managed to stay alive for so long, and still have problems. Even Fred and George were making bets on when Quirrell's body would fail, but in the end, they felt it was too disrespectful to the professor and let it go. Qiong nodded to Hermione, motioning her to leave, and then waited for Quirrell in the classroom alone. To be honest, she was a little nervous, not knowing what Quirrell was going to do, or rather, what Voldemort was going to do. Qiong held her wand in her hand, but she wasn't that scared. It's no secret that he'd been practicing in the room of requirement for so long. While he couldn't claim to be able to defeat Quirrell or Voldemort, He could certainly catch them off guard and escape. Not to mention that his body had absorbed a good amount of rock cakes. He was sure he could outrun even the sickly Quirrell. If the time came, don't blame him for calling Dumbledore to exorcise the spirit, regardless of the plot. Guan Qiong. Quirrell approached Guan Qiong, a scent of garlic wafting from his body. Guan Qiong frowned, wary. No. Do you know where Guan Qiong's parents are from? Quirrell asked with a kind smile. I don't know. I'm an orphan, raised in an orphanage. Points of light flew from Guan Qiong's wand, forming words. Is that so? I wanted to discuss the matter of the human-faced sore with Guan Qiong, Quirrell gasped, as if just saying that was the end of him. With an expectant look in his eyes, his head moved intentionally or unintentionally, allowing the scent of garlic to reach Guan Qiong. I don't know about the human-faced sore. I've never lived in the East, Guan Qiong said. He was a little confused by Quirrell's thoughts. Why did he keep talking about the human-faced sore? Did he tell others that you had Voldemort in you? But even if he knew, what good would it do? He couldn't help Quirrell fight Voldemort. Is that so? Quirrell said disappointedly. Suddenly, his face changed, and he said to Guan Qiong. You can leave now. He spoke so quickly, more quickly than he had ever spoken before. Guan Qiong was a little confused, but nodded. Then, taking his bag, he slowly retreated to the door and turned to leave. As he turned, he suddenly felt a surge of evil, as if someone was trying to pierce him with a needle. A silver light flashed in his eyes, and the magic in his body surged like boiling water. His steps quickened. In the classroom, a cold and sinister voice echoed in Quirrell's mind. Why are you looking for that child? The voice assaulted Quirrell's mind, making his face even paler. My lord, that child is very talented. Dumbledore said he could become the greatest wizard in the world. I think his body is very suitable for you, Quirrell whispered, his eyes flashing with fear and determination. He didn't want to die. In this case, he could only sacrifice Guan Qiong. A cold laugh exploded in Quirrell's mind, making his body cold. He felt a layer of frost on his body, and his blood solidified in his veins, motionless. He will never be the greatest wizard, Voldemort laughed sarcastically. Ever. Chapter 52, Lamora Stone. 2 chapters updated this morning have been rewritten. The Lamora Stone is a very strange magical creature, and it took the wizarding community hundreds of years to even classify it as such. Lamora Stone typically appears as stone, with various properties ranging from yellowstone to granite and sandstone. Initially, no one was aware of its existence until someone discovered that a stone in their yard had shifted half a meter over the past few decades. Upon finding a family drawing of the yard, the man discovered that the stone had been moving, and had already moved dozens of meters, practically spanning the entire yard. He initially believed it was some kind of miraculous natural phenomenon, perhaps imbued with inherent magic. Until one day, when he touched the stone, he unexpectedly heard a small but distinct sound coming from within. The sound continued, uninterrupted, and remained constant. Similar discoveries were also made around the world, and with increasing attention, the Lamora Stone suddenly became a focal point. People discovered that self-moving stones existed throughout the world, but they had previously remained largely unnoticed. The only sounds these stones made were ra and mo, hence the name Lamora Stone. Everyone assumed the Lamora Stones were a miraculous natural phenomenon. In a magical world, such things weren't impossible. In some places, there were burning trees and waterfalls flowing upstream, but they weren't considered anything truly miraculous. However, after studying the Lamora Stones, the World Curious Events Research Society announced a bombshell to the world. The Lamora Stones weren't a natural phenomenon, nor were they stones themselves. They were magical creatures. While they resembled stone in appearance, hardness, and all other properties, they were actually magical creatures, and they lived in groups. Each continent had a population of Lamora Stones, which used these sounds to communicate and determine their direction of movement. The most famous example was Stonehenge, which had been confirmed to be entirely Lamora Stones. Although they seemed to cease reacting after forming Stonehenge, they had become truly stone. No one knows how much time they spent on this, nor why they did it. There are too many mysteries of the Lamora Stone, waiting for people to reveal them one by one. The only thing to note is that the Lamora Stone seems to cause problems in people's perception of time, so if you find a Lamora Stone in your home, you need to drag it away to avoid affecting people. The content of the 2 chapters updated this morning has been rewritten. Chapter 53, Confinement speculations. Guan Qiong left the classroom and didn't see Quirrell's change in the back, but he could guess what had happened. The wave at the back was definitely caused by Voldemort, and the tingling sensation was probably legilimency. Fortunately, Voldemort was in a poor state, and the magic he used was ineffective, so he used Magic Surge to block it. Magic Surge was the phenomenon Guan Qiong had witnessed when he had previously handled a unicorn's corpse. The shattered and exploded magic circuits caused magic to dissipate like a tidal wave, making it difficult for other magic circuits to act on it. He named it Magic Surge and practiced it briefly during this period. It wasn't really magic, but a special technique for using magic to weaken the effects of magic on oneself, acting as a layer of protection. Of course, if someone of Dumbledore's level used magic on him, this protection would be as fragile as paper. However, Guan Qiong knew Dumbledore's character. Unless he had transformed, he would never use magic on a student, and he had been restraining himself. The effectiveness of a surge of magic depends on the total amount of magic power a person possesses. It's like radiating one's own magic power directly outward, colliding with incoming magic circuits, thus weakening or even eliminating the magic's effects. Fortunately, Guan Qiong's talent is exceptional, giving him 10 times the magical power of his peers, and it's still constantly increasing, so he doesn't have to worry about this consumption. Taking a deep breath, Guan Qiong headed towards the Gryffindor common room. What just happened was truly terrifying. He decided to hide near the savior. If Quirrell really attacked him, he would have Harry deal with Quirrell directly, showing Quirrell the true meaning of love magic. As for himself, he had a good idea of his own strength. It was okay for first-year wizards, and he could manage a surprise attack against second- and third-year wizards. But fourth-year wizards and above, his current strength was simply not enough, let alone an adult wizard like Quirrell and Voldemort behind him. Guan Qiong was on his way back to the Gryffindor common room when a figure suddenly appeared from the side, blocking his way. It was Snape. He stared at Guan Qiong with eyes as hollow as tunnels, devoid of a smile. "What's the matter, Professor Snape?" A flash of light flew out, leaving Guan Qiong somewhat puzzled by Snape's response. "I have something to ask you, Guan Qiong," Snape said, twisting his lips into a frightening smile. "Do you think Harry Potter is too foolish to be called the Savior?" Snape's eyes held a mixture of disgust and disdain. "I don't understand what you mean," Guan Qiong said. "What I mean is that the title should belong to you," Snape said, trying to speak more gently. "You possess extraordinary talents and are very intelligent. The title should belong to you, not that foolish Potter," Snape said. Guan Qiong fell silent. The Savior wasn't something you could automatically transform into by pressing F. And why would he need that? He didn't have a scar on his head, and he didn't possess any love magic to protect him. Moreover, becoming the Savior would mean confronting Voldemort head-on. A single misstep could cost him his life. He wasn't that noble. Right now, he simply wanted to study magic diligently, then find time to travel abroad, see the magical world, and return when all was over. But why was Snape telling him all this? "I don't understand you." The dots of light formed into the same words again. Snape didn't explain. He looked at Guan Qiong for a moment before asking, "What month were you born?" Guan Qiong knew. "March, I was born in March," Guan Qiong replied. Snape was silent, his eyes gleaming with an inexplicable light as he gazed at Guan Qiong. Finally, he said, "Think carefully about what I'm saying, Guan Qiong." With that, he turned and left, his black cloak spreading behind him like wings, making him look like a bat in human form, a bringer of darkness. "No, Snape, did you train with the centaurs before? Why are you talking so strangely?" Guan Qiong sighed, completely unable to understand the purpose of Snape's words. Could it be that he really was displeased with Harry and wanted him to break with him, challenge him, and take everything Harry had? Forget it. He didn't want to shoulder Harry's fate and fight Voldemort. That was too much trouble. When Guan Qiong returned to the Gryffindor common room, he saw Hermione, Harry, and Ron sitting at a table, seemingly discussing something. Guan Qiong walked over and saw 2 slips of paper between them. They read, "Your detention starts tonight at 11 o'clock. Meet Mr. Filch in the hallway." They were signed by Professor McGonagall. "June, you're back," Hermione greeted, seeing Guan Qiong first. Pointing at the 2 slips on the table, she explained, "This is about what happened last time. Professor McGonagall said Harry and I should have detention to teach us a lesson. That's not fair. You and June have earned at least 100 points in this time. Why do we still have detention? Ron said. I wonder what it's about. It's not like we're going to have to clean the trophies in the trophy array room on the 3rd floor, Harry said, puzzled. I think they'll lock us up in an empty classroom, throw in a few exams, and keep us from leaving until we finish them, Hermione speculated. Then you'll be in detention every day, Ron complained. Guan Qiong thought about it and remembered what the detention was about. The Forbidden Forest. They would go there, and there they would encounter Quirrell, possessed by Voldemort. A flash of inspiration suddenly struck Guan Qiong, and he had a theory about a punishment. In his previous life, when he was studying, he had thought this punishment was strange and too cruel for students who wandered around at night. After all, if something happened in the Forbidden Forest, students could die. But now, seeing Harry, Guan Qiong suddenly realized that this might be a fishing expedition by Dumbledore, and the bait was Harry. At this point, especially after Hagrid's last report to the school about the unicorn's death, Dumbledore would probably think that Voldemort had returned, but he wasn't sure of Voldemort's location or condition. As for Quirrell, aside from Guan Qiong, everyone else suspected him of turning to the dark arts and joining the Dark Lord Voldemort. They never imagined that Voldemort was within him, brazenly entering the school. Even Dumbledore probably didn't think of this. He probably assumed Voldemort was hiding in the Forbidden Forest, waiting for his chance for revenge. Chapter 54 Another Bait. If that were the case, Dumbledore would have been accompanying Harry on this Forbidden Forest patrol, protecting him throughout, Guan Qiong thought. The only problem was that it was Friday, and he had to go on patrol, meaning he'd have to run into Voldemort again. Guan Qiong felt a headache, but there was nothing he could do. Just go. It's just a detention, nothing serious, Hermione said after the three of them discussed it for a while. Harry nodded. After all, they had been out at night, gotten caught, and had lost a lot of points from Gryffindor House. It was only natural that they were being punished like this. At 11 o'clock that evening, Harry said goodbye to Hermione and Ron, and they walked down to the entrance hall. Fairfowl was already waiting there. But there was also someone unexpected. It was Malfoy, with a sinister expression on his face, even to the point of being nasty. Why are you here? Harry asked with concern. He was sure he'd never been so concerned about Malfoy's well-being before, but he desperately wanted to know what was going on. Malfoy is serving detention for escaping his dorm room without permission at night. This is Professor Snape's decision, Filch explained, and Malfoy's expression darkened. Harry suddenly brightened. He felt that tonight's detention wasn't so bad after all. With Malfoy by his side, he felt much more relaxed, and even thought it was a good thing. Serves you right, Hermione said bluntly. You, Malfoy fumed, but it was of no use. This was their head of house, Snape's, request. He had to come or he wouldn't be in Slytherin. All right, gentlemen and ladies, you can put your quarrel aside for a while, but I still suggest you save your energy. You'll have plenty of time to use it later. Filch smiled with an inexplicable satisfaction. Of course, I quite like this kind of punishment. I believe that after this, you won't think of breaking the rules again, if you make it back alive. Filch lit a lamp and told the three to follow him. Come back alive, Malfoy screamed. What does that mean? Harry and Hermione stared at Filch in bewilderment. What kind of punishment was this? It was so dangerous. You'll find out in a moment. I guarantee it'll be an unforgettable experience, Filch said with a cheerful smile, leading the three of them through the pitch-black grounds. Harry observed the route Filch was taking them. The night was dark, the bright moon casting a silvery veil over the ground. Within this veil, a single yellow light shone, radiating like the sun. That was Hagrid's hut. A warm orange glow streamed from the window, guiding their path. Harry saw Hagrid and Gwen standing in front of the hut, seemingly waiting for them. Filch, you're taking a while, Hagrid's loud voice carried everyone's ears as they approached. Yes, they're a little slow. It's their fault for walking so slowly. But it doesn't matter. They'll probably hate their legs for being so slow, Filch said with a smile. Hagrid, Harry and Hermione greeted Hagrid happily. They saw that things were not too bad when they were working with Hagrid. John, Hermione greeted Jean again. Jean nodded to her and then turned her eyes elsewhere. He was trying to find the person following him, but unfortunately, he could not see anything. So what is this damn detention punishment, and why do we have to come here? Malfoy could not help but ask. He had a bad feeling in his heart. Looking at the deep and dark forbidden forest in the distance, he prayed in his heart that it was not what he thought. "Why, can't you see it from here? You are going to the forbidden forest." Filch had a malicious smile on his face, but he said the punishment. "I hope you can come out safely." "Of course, I just hope." Filch smiled and left with a lantern. "No, we can't do that," Malfoy cried in terror, retreating involuntarily. "I heard there's all sorts of things in there, werewolves, spiders, and other monsters. They'll tear us apart. As long as you stay with us and don't wander off and touch anything, none of that will happen," Hagrid said calmly. Standing before the three of them, his nearly 3-meter tall figure gave them an inexplicable sense of security. Guan Qiong looked at Malfoy, his face paler than ever. Guan Qiong could guarantee that he would rather bungee jump 10 more times than enter the Forbidden Forest. It was a shame, though. This was likely Dumbledore's plan. There was no way he could escape it. Guan Qiong suspected it was Malfoy's bloodline. He was Lucius's son, and Lucius had once been a follower of Voldemort. In other words, he was another bait, a bait that could potentially lead to Voldemort's arrival. "It's almost time. Prepare to enter the Forbidden Forest," Hagrid said, tightening the quiver on his back and holding a massive crossbow. Compared to his wand, his combat power in this state was far greater. This was the first time Guan Qiong had seen Hagrid like this. On previous patrols with him, Hagrid always carried an umbrella. Of course, he did too, but he just tucked it around his waist. "No, I'm not going in," Malfoy roared. "How can a student do something like this? This is a life-threatening matter." Hagrid looked at Malfoy, his gaze from above making him feel incredibly stressed. "Of course, you don't have to go. Do you think I want to take you with me?" Hagrid said. "But you did something wrong, and people who do something wrong must be punished. If you don't want to go, you can return to the castle now and pack your things. You can go back home tomorrow." Malfoy's face changed, and after a moment, he lowered his head in resignation, his fists clenched, and stood beside Hagrid. "Very good," Hagrid nodded, then looked at Harry and Hermione. "Harry, Hermione, don't worry too much. Fang and I will protect you. If we are delayed, just listen to Jean and move closer. He is also very familiar with the Forbidden Forest." "Thank you for your help, Hagrid." "Jean," Harry said. Hermione walked directly to Jean's side, showing with her actions that she would obey. Hagrid exhaled and walked towards the Forbidden Forest. Malfoy, Jean, Hermione, and Harry followed behind him. "Let me briefly explain this mission." Hagrid's voice came from the front, clearly reaching everyone's ears. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 55 Team Action. There's a creature in the Forbidden Forest that's been hunting its magical creatures. Many have been killed, including a unicorn. 2 weeks ago on a Friday night, Hagrid's voice was low, and Harry and Hermione looked at Gwen. That Friday was the day Harry and Hermione dropped Norma off, and Gwen was out on patrol with Hagrid. They hadn't expected this to happen. Malfoy's face paled as Gwen glanced at him. That night, he'd been leading Filch to capture Potter and Weasley, only to encounter Granger and get himself killed. Tonight, that creature has reappeared. Fang sensed an unusual aura in the Forbidden Forest. "We have to find it and prevent it from harming the other creatures there," Hagrid said. Beside him, Fang grinned, staring towards the Forbidden Forest, his tail wagging. Fang wasn't a magical creature, but his animalistic alertness had made him aware of something different. The Forbidden Forest now had a very dangerous aura. "But what if that creature tries to harm us?" Malfoy asked, his voice tinged with fear. "Don't worry, there won't be much danger, as long as you behave," Hagrid said. He looked at Harry and Hermione, then frowned at Malfoy. "We'll split into 2 teams. June, you, Fang, and Malfoy will form one team, and I'll take Harry and Hermione," Hagrid said. "Whoever finds that thing first, or discovers a wounded magical creature, will send green sparks into the sky. If they encounter trouble, they'll send red sparks, and the other team will move in that direction." "Anything else?" Hagrid asked finally. Malfoy looked at Hagrid, who was larger than 4 or 5 of him, and June, who stood beside him with a chuckle. He swallowed and said, "Why don't we act together? Our team is only 2 young wizards and a dog, so we're too weak. Why not act together?" "Well, that's a decision. Don't ask any more questions. As for your team, June has patrolled the Forbidden Forest many times, and with Fang, there won't be any problems." Hagrid didn't explain further and walked straight into the Forbidden Forest, finalizing the matter. Harry and Hermione followed him, and Malfoy quickly followed. Guan Qiong used his magical vision to peer behind him, then rubbed Fang's head before following. He saw nothing, no extra life circuits, no magic circuits, leaving him unable to verify his hypothesis. The Forbidden Forest was dark and silent. They walked a distance inside until they reached a fork in the road. Guan Qiong, Malfoy, and Fang took the left path, while Harry, Hermione, and Hagrid took the right. Guan Qiong walked silently ahead, lantern in hand, occasionally checking his surroundings and looking around and behind him with his magical vision. Without fail, he saw nothing. This left him unable to verify his hypothesis. The quiet night was filled with a cool breeze. Malfoy looked at Guan Qiong's back and felt a deep fear. He was afraid of the unknown thing, but also afraid that Guan Qiong had abandoned him here because of the previous incident. But he had no choice but to follow Guan Qiong closely, praying that Guan Qiong would settle the score with him when they returned. Guan Qiong walked ahead, taking in the dark surroundings, and began to mutter to himself. According to the Philosopher's Stone, the being hunting magical creatures in the Forbidden Forest was likely Quirrell, possessed by Voldemort. Voldemort's condition was so poor that he needed the blood of magical creatures to prolong his life. Unicorn blood seemed the most effective, even though it would bring a curse upon him. But Voldemort had never feared curses, he always cursed others. In the original novel, Harry encountered Quirrell while he was drinking unicorn blood, but this wasn't necessarily the case. After all, Guan Qiong wasn't with him on this trip, but rather Neville. So, he could have run into Voldemort. Guan Qiong was a little nervous. No matter how poorly Voldemort was, he was still the Dark Lord, his reputation was undeniable. Even after being dead for so long, others still dared not speak his true name. He was just a first-year wizard, the two were simply incomparable. But he wasn't overly afraid. For so long, he'd spent at least a quarter of his time practicing magic in the Room of Requirement, and he'd developed numerous strategies using his existing magic. Even if he did encounter Voldemort, he'd be able to protect himself. After all, Voldemort's current state was far too weak. Not to mention the professor following him. Of course, the professor's presence was just a guess, unproven, and he didn't want to rely on anyone else for his safety. Guan Qiong, wary of his surroundings, slowly moved deeper into the Forbidden Forest with Malfoy and Fang. Suddenly, he stopped, his eyes a faint silver light as he glanced at the ground to his right. Malfoy stood nervously behind Guan Qiong, whispering tremblingly, "What's wrong, June?" Fang watched closely, but saw nothing. Guan Qiong didn't speak with a lighting spell, simply shaking his head. Whether Malfoy would be reassured by this was beyond his comprehension. He looked at the ground to his right, and in his magical vision, he saw a broken magical circuit in that patch of land. It was in the shape of a human hand, resembling the bones of a hand seen in an X-ray, with a break at the palm. If Guan Qiong remembered correctly, the magical circuits in this form were limited to one thing, the Vo. It was the herb the centaurs had asked Guan Qiong to find, though that had been last November, and he'd almost forgotten it if the centaurs hadn't mentioned it. Guan Qiong looked at the buried Vo. Its finger pointed in a certain direction. According to information he'd later read, Vo were herbs that migrated underground in groups, often in the direction their finger pointed. In other words, by following the direction pointed by the stray Vo, he could find a group of Vo and complete the centaur's mission. I never expected to encounter Voldemort tonight, but instead complete another mission. Guan Qiong thought to himself, waving Malfoy and Fang to follow, heading in that direction. First, find the Vo, then tell Hagrid tomorrow and have him inform the centaurs. Then, his mission to find the Vo would be complete. He can also look for Voldemort on the way. If Voldemort is waiting for him at Voldemort's location, it would be even better. He can complete two tasks at once. Chapter 56 Living Unicorn. Guan Qiong led Malfoy and Fang to a large, moss-covered tree stump. The sound of gurgling water echoed from somewhere. "Here, have you found something?" Malfoy asked nervously, unable to contain himself. Guan Qiong stopped and looked at Malfoy. Malfoy's body was shaking, his face as pale as the moon. Seeing Guan Qiong looking back, he said hurriedly, "Qiong, have you found anything?" "No, don't go any further." "What if we run into that thing?" Guan Qiong had suddenly turned in a different direction, clearly having discovered something. Malfoy didn't want to follow Guan Qiong and run into that unknown thing. Guan Qiong flicked her wand in her right hand, and a black mass flew out, hitting Malfoy's mouth. Malfoy suddenly felt a damp, disgusting smell in his mouth, and he quickly spat it out. It was a ball of dirt covered with moss. If you don't want to track the thing, shut up. Guan Qiong waved her wand, and a ball of light flew out. It wasn't bright, not even as bright as the moonlight reflecting off the mist on the leaves. The light dots formed into words, forming a pattern before Malfoy. If you say one more word, I'll leave you in the Forbidden Forest and leave you to find your way back. The light dots formed a second sentence, which vanished into thin air after Malfoy read it. Malfoy instinctively started to speak, but immediately covered his mouth with his hand, looking nervously at Guan Qiong. Guan Qiong had already turned and was checking the situation around him, which made him feel relieved and hurried to follow. Guan Qiong used his magical vision to scan the surrounding magic circuits. There seemed to be a strange aura here, a familiar one. As for Malfoy, although he was a child, he was still too annoying. It was impossible to tell what he was doing. And the last incident had shown that if he didn't keep hitting him, he would really cause trouble. Why not kill him here, before he gets in the way and potentially hinders us? Guan Qiong thought maliciously. Behind him, Malfoy shuddered and clutched his clothes. Of course, it was just a thought. He wasn't a devil or a dark wizard. At most, after they left the Forbidden Forest, he could let Malfoy experience another playground game, giving him a complete childhood. Meanwhile, Guan Qiong also noticed the strange thing he had just sensed. On a nearby leaf, there were drops of silver-blue blood. The bright moonlight shone down, and the blood exuded a faint fragrance. Malfoy walked over, wanting to ask, but immediately covered his mouth and stared at Guan Qiong. Guan Qiong didn't want to say anything more, just staring at the blood, then turning to look at the ground. There was some blood on the ground too, but some of it had been absorbed by the soil. He hadn't seen it clearly before, but now he saw that the direction of the blood was the same as the direction of Few. There was a wounded unicorn over there. Guan Qiong made a hypothesis. He strode toward the area, much faster than before. Malfoy hurried to keep up, with Fang trailing behind, alert for any signs of danger. The path was strewn with unicorn blood, still fresh, the last bit still possessing a strange sheen, as if alive. Malfoy nearly licked it, but Guan Qiong's gaze brought him back to his senses. About half an hour later, Guan Qiong and Malfoy reached an open space and stopped. A figure with a horn and a soft glow emanating from its body knelt on the ground, licking its wounds. Around it, countless herbs, resembling human hands or duck feet, sprouted from the ground, emitting gray dust that gathered into dark streams that fell onto the unicorn's body, stanched the bleeding. Hiss! Malfoy began to speak in surprise, but forced a breath back, leaving only a strangled gasp in his throat. Guan Qiong turned, a silver light casting a veil over his black eyes, like moonlight falling on a night lake. He held his wand to his lips, gestured to Malfoy to silence him, and then observed his surroundings. It was certain that Voldemort wasn't here. It seemed the unicorn had temporarily escaped and was probably searching for it. So what should they do now? Send a signal for Hagrid to come, or take the unicorn and escape first? Guan Qiong pondered, glancing at the sky. In the dead of night, the sparks would be very conspicuous, instantly marking their location and allowing Hagrid to find them. But at the same time, Voldemort, somewhere unknown, would also know his location and might even guess that the unicorn was here. If Voldemort arrived first, they might not be able to protect the unicorn. Guan Qiong was confident that he could handle the weakened Voldemort, but without having tried, he couldn't guarantee it. If something went wrong, he might escape, but the unicorn would be dead. Guan Qiong gazed at the nearly perfect creature. The unicorn was even more beautiful than the dead one he had encountered earlier, stunningly beautiful from both a normal and magical perspective. If possible, he wanted to protect the unicorn. After all, it was a legendary creature, and now considered a rare magical animal. With this thought in mind, Guan Qiong approached the unicorn, Malfoy following closely. The unicorn raised its head, fixed its gaze on Guan Qiong, and let out a threatening growl, pointing its horn in Guan Qiong's direction. Magic surged from its horn, a subtle silver light appearing, shattering the surrounding gray undercurrents into dust. Guan Qiong paused, frowning slightly. Although the unicorn pointed its horn at him, he felt no sense of danger, as if the unicorn's threat wasn't directed at him. In other words, The unicorn's hostility wasn't directed at him. Guan Qiong turned, looked at Malfoy behind him, and waved his wand. Malfoy's body instantly floated up, and he almost screamed, but he quickly covered his mouth. Guan Qiong did not do anything, but just controlled Malfoy to step back a distance, and at the same time signaled Fang with his eyes to look at Malfoy. He had been following Hagrid for so long, and he and Fang had a certain tacit understanding. Fang growled softly, glanced at the unicorn, and then ran to Malfoy's side, alertly looking around. When Guan Qiong looked back again, the unicorn had put away its horn and lowered its head, as if it was resting. Guan Qiong walked forward again, and this time the unicorn did not move at all, allowing him to come to its side, not afraid at all. Guan Qiong stretched out his hand and stroked the unicorn's neck. The unicorn raised its head slightly and followed his movements, allowing him to stroke the moon-like mane on its neck. It's so soft. This was Guan Qiong's first thought. But why is the unicorn so obedient? This was Guan Qiong's second thought. Chapter 57 Meeting Voldemort. The unicorn was even more docile than Guan Qiong had imagined. When Guan Qiong used the light spot animation to tell the unicorn to follow him, the unicorn did not object, but supported its injured body and stood beside him, waiting for him to lead the way. Guan Qiong suspected that even if he wanted to ride the unicorn would not object. However, looking at the horrific wound on the unicorn's body, Guan Qiong gave up the idea. Although Fu He stopped the bleeding for the unicorn, it only stopped the bleeding. It would take a long time to heal, especially when Guan Qiong saw through his magical vision that there was a dark magic power constantly wriggling on the unicorn's wound. The silver-white magic circuit in the unicorn's body, like moonlight, was washing away the dark magic, but the effect was not great and it would take a long time. Obviously, Voldemort would not give it that time. Guan Qiong surveyed his surroundings. There was no sign of Voldemort or the professor. Now was the perfect time to leave. As long as he could get the unicorn out of the Forbidden Forest and to Hagrid's hut, Voldemort wouldn't dare pursue it, unless he wanted Dumbledore to notice his condition. He waved his wand and used the levitation spell to grab Malfoy from the distance. Fang trotted over to his side. The unicorn showed hostility toward Malfoy, turning its head and pointing its horn at him. Tiny arcs of silver-blue electricity appeared, circling the unicorn's horn, crackling. Malfoy, struck by a small arc of electricity, let out a howl, but quickly covered his mouth and looked at Guan Qiong nervously. Guan Qiong hadn't expected unicorns to possess so many magical abilities. Just now, one, now another. They were truly legendary creatures. But he couldn't just leave Malfoy there to feed Voldemort. So he reached out and stroked the unicorn's head, trying to comfort it. The unicorn looked at Guan Qiong, its inky black pupils meeting Guan Qiong's eyes, as dark as a night lake. Each reflected the other's features. The unicorn hummed softly, ignoring Malfoy and pausing its magic. So obedient? Guan Qiong looked at the unicorn, somewhat surprised. Could he have a talent for taming animals? In that case, after graduation, he could consider staying on at the school as a care of magical creatures teacher. It seemed his current teacher would be retiring in a few years. But now wasn't the time to dwell on such matters. Now that the unicorn had been calmed, it was best to leave quickly. He walked out of the Forbidden Forest, the unicorn following behind him, but at a leisurely pace. Malfoy followed behind the unicorn, while Fang kept a watchful eye. The Forbidden Forest was dark, and the night wind whipped the leaves around them, making them sway like figures, one after another, swaying around them. This time, they took a different route, which would save them considerable time. Malfoy followed closely behind the unicorn, his left hand covering his right. He'd just been struck by the unicorn's electric arc, and his arm still ached. But if it meant leaving the Forbidden Forest, he'd gladly do it. He didn't want to stay in this damn place for even a second. It was cold and scary, and he had a bad feeling. The unicorn before him had clearly been injured by some unknown entity, and now it was following them. What if? Malfoy's heart trembled. Just then, Guan Qiong, who was ahead of him, stopped. What happened? Malfoy wanted to ask, but he didn't dare, fearing he might attract something unlucky. Then he understood Guan Qiong's meaning. Making any noise in the Forbidden Forest was extremely dangerous and terrifying. Suddenly, he heard a strange sound, like a pair of giant wings brushing against the trees, bringing a rustling sound. Guan Qiong also stopped, frowning, and looked around. Behind him, the unicorn cried softly, its horn emitting a soft glow that shone on them like moonlight, completely obscuring their forms. This was the third type of magic it had used, the very one that had allowed it to evade the creature's pursuit so many times. But this time, something seemed unexpected. The voice grew closer and closer, clearly heading their way. The unicorn turned to look at Malfoy, roaring angrily, its mane whipping as if trying to knock him away. Guan Qiong stopped it in time, looking at Malfoy and sighing. This creature was truly capable of causing trouble. It was obvious that Malfoy's presence had revealed their location. While the mechanism was unknown, it must have something to do with his father's adherence to Voldemort. Perhaps it was some kind of loyalty charm passed down through the bloodline, or perhaps something else. Guan Qiong suddenly felt a sharp gaze, like a needle piercing his body. His magic surged, surging and dispersing in all directions like waves. The next second, a figure shrouded in black robes and a hooded head emerged from the shadows, hovering in mid-air like a ghost in the night. The unicorn let out a sharp cry, brimming with anger and hatred. Silver lightning flashed from its horn and struck the figure. But the figure waved its hand casually, redirecting the lightning. With a loud bang, a dark crater appeared on the ground. Guan Qiong didn't attack, but instead shot a stream of red sparks into the sky. The sparks exploded in the air, scattering like fireworks, indicating his current location. Now that Voldemort had caught up with him, there was no need to hide anymore. Just wave him down. Hey, hey, a sinister laugh emanated from the figure, like a snake crawling through the dark, damp ground. What the hell is this? Malfoy cried in fear, hiding behind the unicorn. Even after being kicked by it, he didn't come out. Guan Qiong stood before the unicorn, facing Voldemort. His magic power surged outward, resisting the piercing gaze. A little trick, a sharp and piercing voice emerged from the shadow, mocking Guan Qiong's surging magic. If he was in his prime, this little trick would not be able to stop his legitimacy. A good trick if it works. Guan Qiong said in his mind, but did not use light to form words. He and Voldemort had nothing to communicate, and since he was caught up by such a coincidence, he had to fight. It was a good opportunity to test the strength he had trained for this semester. Guan Qiong waved the wand in his hand lightly, and his body slowly floated up, just like Voldemort, floating in the air. The moonlight fell from the sky and sprinkled on Guan Qiong's body, as if covering him with a silver cloak. Chapter 58 First Fight. Suspending in midair wouldn't grant him any increased combat power, but it would make him more agile. After all, his dodging options went from 2 to 4, and he didn't have to worry about what was behind him. He looked at Voldemort before him, feeling the relentless legitimacy surrounding him, and chuckled softly. It seemed Voldemort was truly in poor condition, otherwise he wouldn't have used just this one move against him. However, it was ineffective against him right now. Without waiting for Voldemort to continue, Guan Qiong flicked his right wand and unleashed another levitation charm, affecting the stones, leaves, branches, dirt, and other objects on the ground. Under his control, this mass of matter rushed towards Voldemort like a torrent. The black torrent, like a giant python, circled twice in the air before biting down hard on Voldemort. Voldemort waved his hand, and a shield charm appeared, blocking him from view, keeping all the debris at bay. Simultaneously, he extended his right hand and flicked it. A black beam of light shot out from between his fingers, piercing the black python and heading towards Guan Qiong. Guan Qiong didn't know the shield charm, that wasn't first-year material. Just as he was about to dodge, a bolt of lightning shot out from below, shattering the black beam. It then dissipated into basic magic power and dissipated into the air. It was the unicorn, coming to help. Guan Qiong was delighted. With the unicorn, he no longer had to worry about defense. At that moment, two inconspicuous points of light hidden within the black torrent also appeared before Voldemort. A silver light shone brightly in Guan Qiong's eyes. He swung his wand vigorously, and the magical circuits of the illumination charm he was controlling were stretched infinitely, and he poured magic power into them frantically. A violent flash of light appeared before Voldemort, and two bright stars appeared within the black torrent, staring back at him like giant eyes. He couldn't help but close his eyes. It was a natural reaction. Even if he was in Quirrell's body, he would still be affected. The shield charm around him was affected and dissipated, and Guan Qiong had just wanted this moment. He waved his wand, and the black torrent stopped. Branches and leaves flew and scattered. Then he pointed his wand at Voldemort's position, shouting inwardly. Flame, a fiery, bright, endlessly burning, Snake-like flame emerged from Guan Qiong's wand, like an ever-expanding balloon. At first, it was only the thickness of the wand, but later it expanded to the size of Hagrid. Like a stream of high-pressure water, the flames rushed towards Voldemort, engulfing him in the blink of an eye. The heat burned fiercely, the flames scorching. Guan Qiong poured most of his magical power into this flaming spell, making it incredibly powerful. At least Malfoy, watching below, was stunned. The red light shone on his face, and his eyes reflected the burning flames, as if something within him had been burned away. After about 10 seconds of blasting, Guan Qiong retracted the flaming spell and fell to the ground, breathing lightly. Most of his immense magical power had dissipated by then. Aside from the time he rescued Hermione, he had never used it to this extent, yet the effect was remarkable. The flames before him continued to burn even without his magical energy, and they threatened to spread outward. Guan Qiong felt the heat in the air. The tingling sensation had vanished. She wondered what had become of Voldemort. Death was out of the question. At most, he would abandon Quirrell's body and become a wandering ghost once more. After all, he had Horcruxes, and none of them were damaged. However, Guan Qiong was still somewhat surprised when she saw the situation. Voldemort seemed completely unharmed. He stood amidst the flames, their tongues licking his cloak, but they had no effect, merely blowing it like a gentle breeze, causing it to rise and fall. Not bad magical power. It's a pity it's not fiend fire, a voice as eerie and hoarse as a snake uttered, accompanied by a scornful laugh. The invisible, piercing gaze returned, and Guan Qiong had to control the surge of his magical power. He gripped his wand tightly, awestruck by Voldemort's true nature. Voldemort wasn't so easy to defeat. He'd thought this move would at least force Voldemort back, but it had no effect at all. Fortunately, he wasn't so arrogant as to assume victory was certain, and he had other tricks prepared, hoping to hold out until the others arrived. Some time had passed since he'd just launched the red spark. By the time Hagrid arrived, his half-giant body would undoubtedly be able to withstand the pressure. And then, by the time the professors arrived, Voldemort would ultimately be forced to flee. Just as Guan Qiong was about to strike again, thunder roared from the sky, and countless tiny raindrops fell, extinguishing the flames Guan Qiong had just created. Simultaneously, sounds echoed from all around, as if a large crowd were rushing towards them, their footsteps clattering like drums. Voldemort glanced upward, then at the unicorn, before his body levitated and drifted into the shadows behind him. Faintly, something seemed to fall from Voldemort's body, landing on the still unburned grass nearby. Guan Qiong waved her wand, and the object flew towards her, hovering in front of her. It was an ordinary bottle, the kind wizards often use when out and about, storing common items like salt, mercury, and silver powder. Guan Qiong activated her magical vision and peered inside. It was truly just an ordinary bottle, containing only a trace of magic power, lacking a complete magical circuit. Guan Qiong frowned and tossed the bottle into Malfoy's arms. A point of light appeared out of nowhere, converging on Malfoy's face. "Open it and see what's inside." Malfoy stared at the bottle in confusion. Could this be the person who just left it behind? Under Guan Qiong's watchful gaze, Malfoy carefully opened the bottle. Suddenly, a foul odor assaulted his nose, nearly knocking him unconscious. Cough. 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 Malfoy coughed violently, nearly spilling the contents of the bottle. Guan Qiong sniffed the air and looked doubtfully in the direction Voldemort had just left. The bottle contained allicin, a garlic extract. Its scent was over 10 times stronger than regular garlic, and some wizards firmly believed it could repel werewolves and other dark creatures. In the entire school, only 2 people might possess it: Quirrell, the defense against the dark arts professor, and Snape, the potions professor. Was this a setup? Guan Qiong wondered, but at that moment, the owner of the footsteps approached, standing in front of her. Chapter 59 Snape's Thoughts. They were the centaurs from the Forbidden Forest, Firenze, Ronan, and Bane. Firenze gazed at the unicorn with his sapphire eyes, a smile on his face. "Thank you for saving it, Voidster." Firenze bowed slightly to Guan Qiong. Beside him, the 2 centaurs saluted as well. The centaurs revered nature and the stars. As a symbol of the moon and a spirit of nature, the unicorn naturally held reverence among them. Guan Qiong looked at the centaurs and suddenly remembered Firenze's prophecy from their last meeting. Sure enough, by the time they met again, he had found Vor, and through Vor, he had saved the unicorn. It all seemed destined. Prophecies were so annoying. Guan Qiong felt a little annoyed, but there was nothing he could do. After all, prophecies were a crucial element of this world. It could be said that the entire story of Harry Potter was built on a prophecy. This is what I should do. A light appeared before the three of them. Guan Qiong looked at Firenze and paused. Are you taking the unicorn to be healed? He asked. It depends on the unicorn's opinion, Firenze said, walking over to the unicorn and reaching out to caress its wound. Without looking at his upper body, his platinum gold body bore a resemblance to the unicorn, perhaps a blood connection. But the unicorn ignored him, tapping away from Firenze's hand and circling behind Guan Qiong. It doesn't seem willing. Firenze's expression remained unchanged, his smile still etched on his face. Turning to Guan Qiong, he said, I'll leave the unicorn in your care. I'll send you the herbs it needs through Hagrid. No, why are you giving me another task? I'm just a first-year wizard, not a member of the Society for the Protection of Magical Creatures, nor a centaur partner. Guan Qiong was stunned. He hadn't even settled his account with the centaurs for Fuhi yet, so why another task? Was it a series of tasks? But the unicorn behind him lowered its head, lifted itself from his shoulder, and gently nuzzled his cheek, its face reflected in its inky eyes. Guan Qiong reached out and touched the unicorn's head, then nodded in agreement with Firenze. There was no way to resist the cute creatures, whether it was Norma or the unicorn. At this moment, Bane, standing nearby, suddenly became alert, unsheathing his bow and arrows, drawing them and aiming them at the shadows ahead. Centaurs, huh? The voice was extremely flat, with a hint of contempt. But Guan Qiong and Malfoy recognized the voice. After all, there was only one person in the entire Hogwarts school with such a distinctive voice. Snape. Snape stepped out of the shadows, dressed in his usual black attire and a large cape that made him resemble a bat at his swift pace. He stepped out of the shadows, his dark, cold eyes fixed on Bane, and he smirked. I didn't remember centaurs being an unintelligent race. Bane was a little angry, but Firenze reached out and stopped him. Professor Snape, are you here to protect these students? He asked. I just saw a fire here, Snape said, looking around. Guan Qiong's flames had been extinguished by the sudden and abrupt rain, leaving only a dark trail and a scorching smell. You have such abundant magic, but you're using it so crudely. I can see you're enjoying squandering it, Snape commented. Guan Qiong scratched his head. Enjoying it? It seemed quite exhilarating. The feeling of such a surge of power all at once made him feel somewhat invincible. However, it was obvious that this fighting method could only bully players, not adult wizards. Is Hagrid all right? Guan Qiong asked. It's perfectly safe there. What a pity. I thought I'd see Mr. Potter crying in fear. Snape's words carried a hint of regret, but his expression remained unchanged. Guan Qiong glanced at him in confusion. He hadn't asked about Harry's condition, so Snape rushed to answer. Anyway, no wonder the professor hadn't come to help immediately. Snape, you must have gone over there to check on Harry, right? Professor, can we leave now? Malfoy said fearfully, his voice trembling. He didn't want to stay in this place for even a second. It was cold and scary. He missed the Slytherin dormitory so much. Although it was also cold there, it was much safer than here. Snape gave Malfoy a cold look, which made his body tremble even more violently. He turned to look at Guan Qiong and nodded coldly. Follow me. With a tone like an order, Snape turned and left without paying any attention to the centaurs. Malfoy hurriedly followed. Guan Qiong nodded to Firenze from behind and followed him. Unicorn followed behind him, and Fang followed at the end. Firenze watched the few people leave, looked at the starry sky, and said softly, "The stars guide destiny. Follow the unicorn scent and you'll find Fuho, right, Ronan?" "Yes," Ronan nodded. He traced the lingering scent in the air, finding the direction Guan Qiong and the unicorn had come from. He broke into a run, his red fur making him look like a ball of fire. Firenze and Bane followed, platinum light and black shadows darting through the forbidden forest, disappearing in a flash. Guan Qiong followed Snape, and the journey passed without incident. They, along with the unicorn and Fang, reached the edge of the forbidden forest, where Hagrid, Harry, and Hermione were already waiting. There was also someone else, as expected. Dumbledore, headmaster of Hogwarts School, president of the International Confederation of Magic, president of the Wizarding Society, Sir Merlin, first class, a man with a long list of achievements, a living legend. He smiled at the emerging group, His azure eyes behind his half-round glasses focused on Snape and Guan Qiong. "It seems you've completed your mission perfectly, protecting the injured magical creature, the unicorn, and even bringing it back," Dumbledore said with a chuckle. He looked like an ordinary, kindly old man, no different from any other old man except for his long, twisted nose. He also had no magic or magic circuits. Guan Qiong activated her magic perspective, and just like every other observation, she saw no magic or magic circuits on Dumbledore's body. Even his life circuits looked like those of an ordinary old man, somewhat frail. Chapter 60 Quirrell and Voldemort. "It'll need some time to recover. Perhaps Hagrid can take care of it for a while," Guan Qiong said. Hagrid's face lit up with excitement. Honestly, although he knew there were unicorns in the Forbidden Forest, he had never come into contact with a living one. It was a magical creature with its own pride, and he wouldn't even dare approach one. "That's a good thing," Dumbledore said with a smile. "Let me see." Wizard Guan Qiong protected the unicorn from harm in the Forbidden Forest. 50 points to Gryffindor. His voice, piercing and melodious, carried on the night wind into Hogwarts Castle. The giant hourglass recording the House Cup scores shifted in response. The Gryffindor students would be astonished when they saw it tomorrow morning. Gryffindor was now second, only a dozen points behind Slytherin, who held first place. Harry and Hermione exchanged a look of excitement and joy. They had been keeping track of the scores, so naturally, they immediately calculated the results. All the house points lost because of them had been fully recovered thanks to Guan Qiong and Hermione's efforts and this action. As for Harry, there was still a Quidditch match coming up, and that was when he would really shine. A win would allow him to completely overtake Slytherin House. "Thank you very much, Professor Dumbledore," Guan Qiong smiled. "You deserve it, son. Your fire charm is excellent." "Of course, if you could focus a little more," Dumbledore said. "Focus a little more?" Before Guan Qiong could think, Dumbledore spoke again. "All right, children, I'm sure you're tired. Go back to the dorms and get some rest. Tomorrow is Saturday, so you can sleep in." Malfoy, who had been wanting to go back, was the first to run forward when he heard this. He paused when he saw Guan Qiong, Harry, and Hermione hadn't moved. It wasn't that he wanted to go with them, but the road was dark, and if that thing showed up along the way, he wasn't as skilled as Guan Qiong. Guan Qiong glanced at Dumbledore and the impassive Snape standing beside him, guessing they were discussing what had just happened. He didn't bother to care. He comforted the unicorn, told it to come back tomorrow, and then headed back toward the castle. Harry and Hermione followed, and Malfoy followed closely behind, keeping a distance, but not too far. "Good night, Professor Dumbledore, Professor Snape," Hagrid said, and he too headed for his hut. The unicorn had already reached the side of the hut, finding a sheltered spot to rest. Snape and Dumbledore were the only ones left, their black and white robes billowing in the wind like two enormous pairs of wings. "I told you I would protect Harry, Severus," Dumbledore said slowly after a long moment, his voice serious and his face expressionless. "Guan Qiong is all right, is she?" Snape replied, his expression as cold as the night wind. "You were wrong, Severus. You put the life of one student before the life of another." Dumbledore's tone was calm, yet his discontent was palpable. "I do not wish to discuss this with you. No one was hurt or killed today." "Your statement is meaningless," Snape said. Silence, like the thick darkness of the night, enveloped the two men. "Did you catch up with him?" After an indefinite pause, Dumbledore finally spoke, inquiring about something else. "No, he's well hidden," Snape replied. "But I can smell him." He's back," Dumbledore whispered. "Of course I knew he would return. But in what form?" This was the question to be determined during tonight's operation, but unfortunately, Snape had missed the opportunity. "You are too weak, Albus. If you could capture Quirrell, I would have 100 ways to make him tell you the answer you desire," Snape said. "No, Quirrell must be kept for now." Dumbledore rejected Snape's suggestion. "He's an anchor. As long as he's in the school, Voldemort won't leave here and wander elsewhere. This is a great opportunity, and we can't alert him, whatever you say, Albus. I just want one promise." Snape's dark eyes fixed on Dumbledore's azure ones. "Why question an old man's love for his children, Severus? No student will be harmed, I promise," Dumbledore said. Snape gave him a deep look and turned away. The black wind blew his black cloak, cloaking him in darkness. Dumbledore looked at him from behind and sighed deeply. the wrinkles on his face seeming to deepen. In the Forbidden Forest, a cloaked figure collapsed to the ground, twisting its body in agony. "Master, please, let me go, Master," Quirrell pleaded tremblingly, his body rolling on the ground. "Why didn't you let me absorb your power just now?" A cold, foul voice rang out from behind Quirrell's head, tinged with anger. If Quirrell hadn't resisted, he would have killed the young wizard long ago. It would have been just a killing curse. "Master, I am too weak to withstand your devouring," Quirrell said painfully, holding his head. His hood was accidentally lifted, revealing a pale, aged face. Quirrell's face was covered with age spots and wrinkles, his eyes were dull, and his body was extremely weak. He breathed heavily and begged for mercy from Voldemort, who was attached to him. "Master, please give me a little more time. I will find other magical creatures and use their blood to restore your strength." "Fool, the centaurs have discovered us. The Forbidden Forest is not safe. We must return," Voldemort said coldly. "I understand, Master. I will find the Philosopher's Stone and restore your strength," Quirrell said quickly. "This is your last chance." Voldemort's voice was extremely cold. As he finished speaking, an extremely strong section force appeared again, absorbing Quirrell's life force, magic, and other things. Quirrell's face began to sag, as if being devoured from within by a monster. He clutched at his face tightly, feeling the life and strength drain from his body. Fortunately, Voldemort didn't want to kill him yet. At the last moment, he stopped. Quirrell breathed heavily, even weaker than before, like an old man with one foot halfway in his coffin. But he wasn't dead yet, he was still alive. Quirrell felt relieved. As long as he was alive, there was hope. And Voldemort within him, having absorbed enough vitality and magic to sustain his soul, fell back into deep sleep. Quirrell slowly stood up, pulled out a bottle of dark potion, and drank it. His life, already languishing like a candle in the wind, burned faster, and his weakness quickly faded. The wrinkles on his face disappeared, and his eyes returned to their former state. However, the only price he paid was that he only had less than 3 months left to live. And there was only one way to save him, the elixir of life. The Philosopher's Stone. Chapter 61. 3 Speculations. That unexpected yet ordinary night passed. Only a handful of people in the entire school knew what had happened, and of those few, only 1 or 2 grasped the truth. But they could only grasp a partial, self-perceived version of the truth, trapped in the fog of reality. Harry woke up in the morning, thrilled. Someone had returned the invisibility cloak he had lost in the astronomy tower. It lay beside his bed, just as it had been when it was first delivered, like a Christmas present. A note was pinned to it, just in case. Harry couldn't figure out who had returned it, nor could he understand the meaning of just in case, but he was overjoyed. When he had lost the invisibility cloak in the astronomy tower, he had been heartbroken for a long time. It was his father's legacy, and he had lost it like that. "I think it must have been Professor Dumbledore," Hermione speculated at the dinner table. "Only Professor Dumbledore could have done it. He's been the headmaster for years. Perhaps your father was one of his students, which is why he entrusted the item to Professor Dumbledore and then passed it on to you." "So what does just in case mean?" Harry asked. Hermione frowned in thought, not even eating the toast in front of her. "I know," Ron said loudly, his tone rising with excitement as Harry and Hermione looked at him. "He must have asked us to protect the Philosopher's Stone on the 4th floor. Professor Dumbledore must be afraid that Snape would steal the stone while he's away, so he's asking us to stop him." "Yes. That must be what he means. Professor Dumbledore asked us to protect the stone while he's away." Harry, too, became excited, his face flushed, and his blood started to boil. Hermione felt something was wrong, but she couldn't figure it out, so she turned to ask Guan Qiong, who was lost in thought. "June, what do you think?" Guan Qiong had been thinking about last night's events all morning, especially Professor Dumbledore's comments about his fire spell, and hadn't paid much attention to the trio's discussion. At Hermione's question, Guan Qiong pulled herself back to her thoughts, pondering for a moment before a light suddenly appeared before the three of them. "That makes sense." Harry and Ron, seeing Guan Qiong agree with their thoughts, grew even more excited, their eyes practically lighting up. Guan Qiong smiled and said nothing more. Dumbledore and Snape's appearance yesterday undoubtedly showed they were not completely ignorant of what was happening at the school. They even knew that Quirrell had defected to Voldemort. So, Harry's return of the invisibility cloak and the note were clearly another of Dumbledore's plans. Whether he wanted to use Harry to determine Voldemort's condition or for some other purpose, it had little to do with Guan Qiong. As he always believed, Harry's story should be left to unfold on its own, unless it involved him. But did Dumbledore know that Voldemort was now possessed by Quirrell? Guan Qiong suddenly considered this question, but had no answer. He didn't want to get involved in Harry and Voldemort's story for another important reason: he didn't know how to explain the source of the information to Dumbledore. If he couldn't explain it clearly, and Dumbledore used legilimency to access his memory, that would be disastrous. Dumbledore normally held himself to high moral standards and wouldn't use legilimency on anyone else without reason, but when it came to Voldemort, he'd probably go the extra mile and not think twice. His little tricks could only bully a weakened Voldemort, but they wouldn't have any effect on Dumbledore. Guan Qiong had some self-awareness. What happened last night? Harry, Hermione, what happened to you? Ron asked curiously. He'd only just woken up that morning to find out that last night's detention had involved a trip to the Forbidden Forest, which had shocked him. Fortunately, Harry and Hermione had returned safely. As for Guan Qiong, although she hated to admit it, she went to the Forbidden Forest every week. It was probably safer for her than flying lessons. Oh, and Malfoy, why didn't he die in the Forbidden Forest? Ron felt very sorry. We didn't encounter anything, Harry said. We were with Hagrid and were safe along the way, just a little cold, then we saw red sparks in the sky. When we were about to go help, Professor Dumbledore appeared and told us to follow him, saying that a professor had already gone. Hermione continued. She turned to look at Guan Qiong. The incident happened with Guan Qiong, and Guan Qiong hadn't had time to share it with him. At the beginning, Malfoy and Guan Qiong controlled the light points to appear in front of them, like a novel, directly generated online. After they came back last night, they were so tired that they didn't communicate again. It wasn't until they came to the restaurant for breakfast this morning that they had time to get together and talk. Finally, the person covered in cloak escaped, leaving only this bottle behind. Guan Qiong took out a bottle of Allison and placed it on the table. Then the centaurs and Professor Snape came rushing over because of the fire spell I cast. That's what happened. Hermione picked up the bottle on the table and opened the lid. A strong, overpowering smell emanated, ruining everyone's appetite. Hermione quickly closed the lid and said, "It's Allison, the same smell Professor Quirrell has. Snape might have it on him, too. He's the potions master," Harry said immediately, his reaction quick. Could that mean the cloaked figure Joan encountered last night was Snape, the one who harmed the magical creatures in the Forbidden Forest? Why? Ron asked. Unicorn blood can prolong life, allowing a dying person to survive, but only to linger, and they'll receive the unicorn curse. It's written in the books, Hermione said. Only one person would do that, and not be afraid of the curse, right? Harry reacted quickly. Ron, standing beside him, realized who he was talking about. His eyes widened, a look of fear on his face. No, Harry, don't say that name, Ron, you should overcome your fear. Voldemort's name is nothing special. Anyone can say it, Harry encouraged. But Ron became even more frightened when he heard the name. Hermione didn't feel anything. She had lived in human society for the first 12 years and didn't grow up hearing stories about Voldemort. In comparison, she was more afraid of legends like hags. That seems to be what happened. Joan's fire spell was too strong. We saw flames on the other side. Snape was obviously scared and fled in panic, but the bottle on his body fell off, Hermione concluded. No, there might be another possibility, Harry retorted. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 62: The Trio's Persistence. Perhaps Snape dropped the bottle on purpose, hoping to divert our attention and pin the blame on Professor Quirrell. After all, Professor Quirrell always smells of garlic, so we definitely think of him first, Harry thought. His mind was extremely active at that moment, and he felt that this was the smartest he'd been in 12 years. He had seen through Snape's plan. Yes, that must be it. Otherwise, why would it be such a coincidence that the bottle containing Allison was dropped? I don't believe he didn't have other bottles on him, Ron agreed. Hermione also thought this theory made more sense, and it fit with their suspicions about Snape. Guan Qiong, listening nearby, also found it very plausible. If he hadn't already known the person was Quirrell, he would probably have believed this theory. However, since the person was already confirmed to be Quirrell, the above two possibilities were invalid. The only possibility left was that Quirrell dropped the bottle on purpose and then framed Snape. This was Guan Qiong's theory, and he couldn't think of any other possibility. So, Snape attacked the unicorn first, then it escaped and encountered Gwen. Snape then attacked Gwen again, only to be frightened by Gwen's fire spell. Then the centaurs arrived, forcing him to flee before returning, pretending to protect Gwen and the unicorn. Hermione explained the whole story piece by piece, finally untangling the entire story. That's definitely the case. He even fooled Professor Dumbledore. Professor Dumbledore believed he was protecting the unicorn, but he was the one who actually heard it, Ron said excitedly. We need to warn Professor Dumbledore, Harry added, his expression agitated. Calm down. Professor Dumbledore won't believe us, just like Hagrid didn't believe Snape when he cursed Harry's broomstick. Hermione poured cold water on them. And you should have seen last night that Professor Dumbledore was with Professor Snape, not Professor McGonagall or Professor Flitwick. He trusted Snape more than we thought, Hermione said. Harry and Ron slumped. Ron looked at Gwen, unwilling to give up, but Gwen simply shrugged. Unless you present evidence to me, a light appeared before the three, a sight they were already accustomed to. Honestly, if they hadn't seen it with their own eyes, they wouldn't have believed a professor would aid Voldemort and harm students. This bottle, Harry said unwillingly. Gwen pondered for a moment before replying, it doesn't mean anything. It could have been dropped by Professor Quirrell. You mean Professor Quirrell? That's impossible. He's in such poor health he'd probably faint before even reaching the Forbidden Forest, Harry retorted. Besides, Professor Quirrell is the Defense Against the Dark Arts professor. He's hostile to you-know-who and helped design the level protecting the Philosopher's Stone on the 4th floor, Hermione said. Ron nodded, agreeing with the two men's point of view. Well, if you insist, Gwen said helplessly. Fortunately, the exams were less than a month away, and they would soon see Quirrell's true face. He didn't bother trying to persuade them now. That's definitely the truth, Ron said, his freckled face brimming with confidence. Breakfast was almost over, and the group stopped discussing these matters and prepared to head to Hagrid's hut to see the unicorn they'd rescued yesterday. Ron was deeply curious about unicorns, as they were even rarer than dragons. And few people could come into contact with them. They can see into people's hearts, so those with evil intentions and bad intentions shouldn't approach them, Ron said excitedly on the way. He'd heard stories about unicorns since he was a child, but he hadn't expected to actually see one, and maybe even touch one. This was something Bill, Charlie, Percy, George, and Fred had never done before. It was incredibly exciting. I know about these things. I heard that in the past, unicorns were used to select pure young girls to be saints. I saw it in a book, but I don't know if it's true, Hermione said excitedly. Like dragons, unicorns were a part of human legend, enjoying immense popularity, which was why Hermione was so excited. Harry didn't think it was a big deal. He wasn't interested in any of this. He even thought it would be better to go see what Snape was doing, just in case he was planning to steal the Philosopher's Stone. But he comforted himself that with Dumbledore in the school and Fluffy guarding the place, Snape wouldn't be able to do anything. When the four of them walked out of the castle and onto the lawn, they saw Hagrid's huge figure busying around in front of his hut. It was unknown what he was doing, and in front of him, the unicorn was holding its head high and jumping nimbly on its forelegs to avoid Hagrid. When the four of them got closer, they realized that Hagrid was about to apply the prepared ointment to the unicorn to help its wound heal faster. Hagrid greeted them happily after seeing the four of them coming. Hi, good morning, Harry, Ron, Hermione, and Joan. Joan, come and help me. Hold the unicorn down while I apply medicine to its wound. Guan Qiong stepped forward. The unicorn calmed down a bit when it saw Guan Qiong, but when Hagrid approached, it raised its head and pointed its horn at him. Lightning surged from the horn, crackling and exuding a dangerous aura. Let me do it, Guan Qiong said. He walked up to the unicorn, and there was no resistance at all. The unicorn lowered its head meekly, allowing him to pet it. Well, Joan, it seems it only wants you to get close, Hagrid said helplessly, placing the prepared ointment on the ground. As soon as he approached Guan Qiong, the unicorn glared at him, ready to attack at any moment. Guan Qiong waved his wand, and the bowl of ointment flew up and landed in front of Guan Qiong. In Hagrid's hand was a bowl, like a teacup, larger than Joan's entire hand. Inside was a green and black ointment, emitting a faint, grassy scent that made the scent feel lighter. The trio tried to move closer to help, but just like Hagrid, the moment they approached, the unicorn showed resistance and hostility, its body tense, its horn pointed at them, ready to attack or flee. Even Hermione was the same. "Don't get close. It only trusts Joan. Let Joan take care of it," Hagrid said. "Why? Norma, the unicorn, too. Why is Joan so popular with magical creatures?" Ron said, unconvinced. "I've heard that Easterners have a great talent for these kinds of things, caring for animals, growing plants, and so on, but I'm not too sure," Hagrid said hesitantly. Chapter 63 Unicorn Magic. Compared to last night, the unicorn's wound hadn't improved much, only the bleeding had stopped thanks to Fu-Hee. From Guan Qiong's magical perspective, a lingering black magic remained at the side of the unicorn's wound, hindering its healing. The unicorn's own silver magic continuously washed away the black magic, though the effect was minimal. Guan Qiong applied the black and green ointment to the unicorn's wound. The unicorn's body trembled slightly, clearly feeling the pain, but it endured it without moving. Guan Qiong quickly covered the wound, emptying the bowl. The unicorn's once pristine white body was now streaked with black and green, appearing rather unsightly. However, the effect was remarkable. The black magic gradually evaporated under the ointment, and the unicorn's wound began to heal slowly. Full recovery was only a matter of time. The unicorn nuzzled Guan Qiong's face affectionately, and Guan Qiong petted its head in return. "Great. Glad you're here, Joan. Otherwise, I wouldn't know what to do," Hagrid said thankfully, taking the bowl from Guan Qiong. "It's nothing." Guan Qiong, though unsure why the unicorn would only accept his care, wasn't averse to such a thing. It was also a good opportunity for him to try out an idea he'd had. Hagrid invited everyone inside the hut. He had just made some rock pancakes and delicious stuffed sandwiches on the fireplace. The trio would have preferred to spend time with the unicorn, but the unicorn refused to give up, leaving them with regret. They also had some things to discuss with Hagrid, including the speculation about the invisibility cloak and the bottle of Allison. They also warned Hagrid that Snape couldn't be trusted, and told him not to share the method he'd used through Fluffy. Guan Qiong remained outside, telling Hagrid he needed to check on the unicorn to see if there were any other issues. Guan Qiong and the unicorn were the only ones left outside. A gentle breeze rustled the unicorn's mane, tickling Guan Qiong's face, leaving him feeling a bit itchy. Guan Qiong reached out a hand to smooth the unicorn's mane, then extended his other hand and placed it before its eyes. The unicorn looked at him in confusion. Light dots flew from Guan Qiong's hand, quickly forming the shape of a unicorn, leaping and running before the unicorn, vivid and lifelike. The unicorn's eyes widened in curiosity as he gazed at the unicorn in Guan Qiong's hands. Guan Qiong controlled the light unicorn, causing other tiny dots of light to appear around it. These then converged on the unicorn's horn, brightening the horn's light before transforming into a beam and shooting out. More light dots then appeared, converging around the unicorn's horn, forming lines that curved and flickered, mimicking the appearance of lightning. Finally, the lightning died down, and the light dots gradually faded as well. The light of the light unicorn began to dim, as if it were about to disappear. Guan Qiong swatted the light dots away, then looked at the unicorn with anticipation. After caring for Norma and learning the fire spell from her, he had an idea. Perhaps by observing magical creatures, he could learn some magic from their magical circuits, especially the circuits they use when casting spells. However, during his time in the Forbidden Forest, he hadn't encountered any suitable magical creatures. The few he had encountered showed little trace of magic, unlike legendary creatures like unicorns, which could cast multiple spells on their own. The unicorn looked at Guan Qiong and nodded in understanding. It understood Guan Qiong's meaning. After all, unicorns were not without intelligence. With a soft whistle, the surroundings seemed to shift, and magical energy from the air converged on the unicorn. Its horn shone brightly, like the first rays of light from a bright moon shining into the night sky, casting a silvery glow around it. A dangerous aura emerged, and Guan Qiong, standing beside the unicorn, felt a light like a cold breeze brushing his face, tempting him to retreat. But he didn't. Instead, he took a step forward, his eyes wide open, observing the unicorn closely. From his magical perspective, countless magical energies gathered from the surrounding air into thin silver threads, spiraling around the unicorn's horn. Inside the unicorn's body, The magical circuits outside the life circuit also underwent a dramatic transformation, transforming in a split second, so fast that Guan Qiong couldn't even see clearly. It felt like someone solving a Rubik's Cube in front of him in 3 seconds, and by the time he realized it, it was already complete. Guan Qiong sighed and shook his head at the unicorn. It seemed impossible to learn this magic. He couldn't even see it clearly, let alone simulate it with his magical powers. Moreover, at his current level, he couldn't simulate something so complex. The unicorn stopped the spell, and everything around it returned to normal. The silvery white light disappeared, and the fluctuating magical energy returned to a calm state. It seemed as if nothing had happened. But the grass that slumped down towards the unicorn was a testament to the tremendous concentration of magical energy that had just occurred. Continue with the second spell, Guan Qiong gestured to the unicorn, his eyes filled with anticipation. The unicorn's horn lit up again, but this time, there was no intense surge of magical energy or fluctuations like before. Instead, silver-blue lightning appeared out of thin air, exploding beside the unicorn. Guan Qiong observed carefully, but soon shook his head helplessly. If the previous spell had allowed for some observation, this one was completely invisible. The magical circuits shifted so rapidly, like real lightning, that Guan Qiong didn't even notice at first. Only when recalling it did he find a tiny glimpse of it, glimpsing a trace through the cracks of his memory. It was impossible to learn something like this. The unicorn paused, and the lightning surrounding its horn vanished. The unicorn turned to look at Guan Qiong, then gently nudged his shoulder with its head, perhaps as a gesture of comfort. "Thank you," Guan Qiong said, controlling the light, even though the unicorn didn't understand. He reached out and touched the unicorn's head. "Let's begin, the third spell," he gestured. The unicorn nodded gently, and a soft glow began to appear on its horn, spreading around like moonlight. Its aura began to change, as if it had merged with the surroundings. The life and magic circuits within its body began to disappear, and the gap between its body and the surrounding environment became blurred. If you didn't look closely, you wouldn't even notice that there was a unicorn here. Guan Qiong's eyes lit up, and she stared at the unicorn closely. Chapter 64 3 books. This magic can be learned. Guan Qiong quickly pulled out her notebook and recorded the magic circuit she had seen. It was a three-dimensional magic circuit, composed of 2 parts. The first part resembled an infinity symbol. At the intersection of the 2 circles, one of the threads was broken. One end connected to the unicorn's life circuit, and the other to the unicorn's magic circuit, forming a complete loop that slowly vanished from Guan Qiong's sight. The other part resembled a spider's 8 legs, extending directly from the intersection of the infinity symbol's magic circuit. Yet, as gentle as spider silk, it swayed with the surrounding environment, allowing the unicorn's body to blend in. The entire magic circuit seemed alive, subtly changing its form according to changes in its surroundings, allowing the unicorn to blend into any environment. Guan Qiong recorded this unique magic circuit after the fire spell and gave it a name. Unlike the invisibility charm, which renders an object invisible, this spell reduces its presence, blending it completely into its surroundings, rendering it unnoticeable. Even those who saw it would overlook it. Guan Qiong excitedly closed his notebook. Although he hadn't learned the first 2 offensive spells, having gained something was still a win. This also confirmed his previous belief that he could learn magic by observing magical creatures. It was just too difficult and required a certain amount of luck. Of course, this spell only recorded the magic circuits, and it would take a long time to master it, but at least he had a start, right? Guan Qiong hugged the unicorn, patting its neck happily, and then got smeared with the ointment on its body. At this time, Hagrid, Harry, and Hermione also came out. "Don't say it, Harry. I trust Professor Snape. He would never hurt a unicorn, and he wouldn't steal the Philosopher's Stone," Hagrid said firmly. He dismissed the trio's claims as mere fantasy. After all, they were only 11 or 12 years old, and back then, he'd also enjoyed fantasizing about foiling villains' plans and saving the world. "But, Hagrid, what we're saying is true," Ron said anxiously. "I think you should be more worried about your exams. Time's running out." "Really, I shouldn't have let Nicholas Flamel slip." Hagrid felt a touch of regret, believing it was him who had fueled the excitement. If he hadn't spoken so quickly, they wouldn't have known the Philosopher's Stone was on the 4th floor, and perhaps they would have forgotten the whole thing. Okay, Hagrid, but you have to promise us not to tell anyone about the method you used through Fluffy," Hermione didn't force Hagrid to believe her. She just wanted to confirm Fluffy's reliability with Hagrid. As for the other professors, Snape had likely cracked all the levels they'd prepared, except for Professor Quirrell. Even Professor Quirrell wouldn't have lasted much longer. After all, he was so frail, looking like he'd die at the slightest gust of wind. I can promise that. I won't tell a soul, Hagrid said, raising his hand, a hint of pride on his face. This is a task Dumbledore gave me. Of course I'll complete it. In fact, I haven't even told Joan yet. You should understand how secretive I am. Guan Qiong then approached the others. Upon hearing Hagrid's words, the trio turned their gazes to her. She shrugged, and a light appeared from space. I'm not curious about this, that's how a student should be. Don't ask about things you shouldn't be curious about. Study hard and earnestly, Hagrid said approvingly. But Harry, Ron, and Hermione were clearly not listening. Hermione, looking at Guan Qiong's expression, felt as if he had already figured out how to get past Fluffy. This wasn't difficult to understand. Guan Qiong always knew a lot of strange knowledge. He read far more miscellaneous books than she did, and many of them were recommended to her by Guan Qiong after he had read them himself. Don't worry too much. With Dumbledore here, Hogwarts is the safest place. No one can steal the Philosopher's Stone, even if they pass all the levels. In fact, they can't even get past the first level, because Dumbledore and I are the only ones who know Fluffy's weakness, Hagrid said, trying to reassure them. But judging by their expressions, his words had no effect. The four of them returned to Hogwarts Castle. Guan Qiong headed straight for the library, intending to look up some books on fire spells. He had some new ideas about last night's events and his own fire spells. But those ideas were just seeds, requiring the nourishment of knowledge to grow and manifest into full and clear form. Harry and Ron, pressed by Hermione, returned to the Gryffindor common room. Their study plans had already been delayed all morning by the unicorn and Hagrid, and they couldn't afford to lose the afternoon. Although Harry and Ron were deeply reluctant, they had no choice. They didn't dare to defy Hermione. Without Hermione's help, who knew what would happen to their exams? Perhaps they wouldn't even pass a single one. Guan Qiong walked all the way to the library, greeted Madame Pants, who was guarding the library, and walked into the library. Of course, he didn't go to the restricted section. What he wanted to find hadn't reached the restricted section yet. After browsing 6 large bookshelves, Guan Qiong finally found the book he wanted on the 7th shelf. The book was as thick as 2 city wall bricks, and it had a name written on it in gold letters. Fantastic thoughts on the fire spell. Guan Qiong used the levitation spell to take the book down with satisfaction, letting it float next to him, and then continued to search on the next bookshelf. One book was not enough. He would be busy recently, and he didn't know when he would be in the library next time. He had to find a few more books and check them out. He could read them before going to bed or when he woke up and didn't want to get up. On the 9th bookshelf, Guan Qiong found another book. It was much more worn than the previous one. The words on it were faded, and some of them were even falling off, showing how often it was borrowed. Flame, The Origin of Humanity and Wizardry. Guan Qiong waved her wand, and the book flew out, landing beside her like 2 portable book spirits. Then, on the 12th bookshelf, Guan Qiong found a third book. This book was not much different from the previous 2, the type that was neither new nor old. Unlike the other 2 books, it was a collection of novels and stories. Flame Tales. Guan Qiong scratched her head, but still waved her wand and took down the book, which was only half a brick thick. I hope they can be useful, Guan Qiong said to herself, taking them to Madame Pants to check out the books. Chapter 65, How to Use the Fire Spell. Hogwarts calmed down again. Although undercurrent still lingered, they had no effect on Guan Qiong, as long as he didn't take the initiative. 2 weeks had passed since their last foray into the Forbidden Forest, and only 2 weeks remained until the end of the school year. Quirrell's condition had unexpectedly improved. Although he still stuttered and looked pale, his eyes had brightened, no longer the timid look he had before. Seeing Quirrell like this, the trio felt more reassured about the Philosopher's Stone. Clearly, Professor Quirrell had strengthened his resolve and was no longer afraid of Snape's threats. Snape's complexion, however, grew increasingly grim. He wandered the castle all day, his face gloomy and irritable. Whenever he encountered Harry, he would sternly tell him to get back to the Gryffindor common room and stop wandering around. Harry, believing this was because he couldn't find a way to pass the level set by Fluffy and Professor Quirrell, felt much better, and his memorization became faster. After a week of Guan Qiong's care, the unicorn's wounds had completely healed. As the green and black lumps shed from its body, it once again radiated a radiance of nature, bringing a sense of peace to everyone who saw it, as if soothed by moonlight. After exchanging a heartfelt greeting with Guan Qiong, it returned to the Forbidden Forest. As a mature unicorn, there was no need to worry about its safety. Unless it encountered a monster like Voldemort, no creature could harm it. Everything returned to normal, and Guan Qiong returned to his routine of attending classes, attending the dining hall, and visiting the room of requirement. Of course, the room was his primary focus. Inside the room of requirement, Guan Qiong stood in the center of the spacious room, 3 books of varying thickness floating around him, each open to different positions, revolving around him like planets. He gently waved his wand, and fantastic thoughts on the fire spell floated before him, turning the pages as he moved to the point he had previously been reading. But after only a moment, he flicked his wand and moved the book away, replacing it with Fire, the Origin of Humanity and Wizardry. The fantastic ideas of fire spells primarily explains how to use fire spells to create dazzling effects, including various methods for changing the color of fire spells and making them explode into different shapes. Overall, it's a manual on creating fireworks, which isn't particularly useful for him right now. However, if he plans to apply for a job as a magical pyrotechnician, as needed for large-scale events, after graduation, it might be worth a careful read. However, Guan Qiong doesn't have that in mind at the moment. He's still just a first-year wizard. Fire, the Origin of Humanity and Wizardry is an intriguing book, describing primitive man's exploration of fire and wizards' quest for its power. Meditation in the land of lava and the land of fire dragons led the first wizards to gain the key to harnessing the power of fire, thus inventing the fire spell. Furthermore, the fire spell was the first magic mastered by wizards. However, all of this is purely conjecture on the author's part, with no actual evidence. At the end of the book, the publisher explains that the author disappeared while searching for the land of lava and the land of fire dragons. The authenticity of the entire book is questionable, and readers must make their own judgment. Guan Qiong wasn't interested in the authenticity of the book's contents. He simply found it pleasant to read, with a touch of unofficial history and biography, though its content didn't offer much insight into what he was looking for. Reluctantly, Guan Qiong waved his wand, causing Flame, the Origin of Humanity and Wizardry to move aside and allowing Flame Tales to float before him. Flame Tales was a collection of pure fiction, chronicling 7 stories related to flames. Some were invented by the author, some were hearsay, and a few were real experiences. When Guan Qiong borrowed a book, he intended it as a daily pastime, much like Dragon Man Adventures and later reads like Magic City, True and False Cases and Angel Descends, Wings of Unable to Love. After all, one couldn't just keep reading magical histories. While those were interesting, sometimes one needed a change of pace. Unexpectedly, Flame Tales actually inspired him. First, the opening story, the Flame Bella chapter, was based on the author's own personal experiences, lending it a certain authenticity. Bella was a witch, the descendant of a giant and a human, with giant blood coursing through her veins. This made her fighting style more like that of a giant, often engaging wizards in duels with her own flesh and blood. Of course, she was also an exceptional wizard, particularly skilled in the use of fire spells. According to records, Bella's fire spells were so powerful that they could be cast silently and without a wand, allowing her to control flames that covered her entire body. Therefore, records show that Bella's fighting style often involved covering her entire body in fire spells, like a flaming giant, charging at her enemies. Ordinary wizards were intimidated by her physical strength, and most magic was blocked by the flames, unable to exert its full effect, often resulting in defeat. The name Flame Bella spread, and was recorded by travelers in Flame Tales. Guan Qiong read the book's description of Flame Bella. It described her as having golden hair, with red flames rising from her eyes, dancing through her golden hair, each strand distinct and seamless. The pulsing gold and red colors gave her the air of a god of war. He waved his wand, causing Flame Tales to float aside. Then, with a gentle tap, red flames erupted from the tip like fireworks. The flames were small. He controlled the flow of his magic power while extending his left hand toward the flames. It burned. He silently withdrew his hand, ceased his magic control, and let the flames vanish. His left hand was fine. He had been eating rock biscuits recently, and his physical attributes had improved significantly. His skin was also tougher than an average person's. However, he was still flesh and blood. It couldn't be due to the blood of a giant. Guan Qiong thought to himself. The author of Flame Tales speculated that Flame Bella's bloodline was most likely that of a fire giant, allowing her body to withstand the flames that enveloped her, but Guan Qiong had a different idea. Setting aside the fire giants, a branch of giants only heard of in legend, even if Bella truly possessed the blood of a fire giant, that wasn't the primary factor in her becoming Fire Bella. After all, her flames weren't born through her bloodline, but through the wizard's magic. Just because she was half giant, we shouldn't forget she was a master of fire spells, a silent and wandless caster of them. Of course, her giant bloodline gave her a stronger ability to withstand the effects, but the primary factor was her absolute mastery of fire, preventing the effects of the fire spell from affecting her. Chapter 66 Avenger Laval. Guan Qiong waved his wand again, and flames emerged from the tip of his wand. He tried to control the first phase of the flame, carving a cavity within it. But inevitably, the second and third phases of the flame emanated in all directions, quickly filling the cavity. A faint silver light flashed in Guan Qiong's eyes, and he concentrated his mind on controlling the second and third phases of the flame. The flowing water ceased its unbridled flow, and the rising mist drifted in a single direction like the wind. However, there was no actual wind, rather, Guan Qiong focused his mind on the magical circuits, controlling them. Then, he extended his hand into the cavity of the flame spell. As expected, the cavity was like the eye of a tornado, unaffected by the flames. Guan Qiong looked at his left hand. Under his control, the cavity now enveloped his entire hand, and flames rose, as if emanating from his left hand. If you ignore the wand in his right hand. Guan Qiong retracted his wand in his right hand, the flames dissipating, and the silver gleam in his eyes faded, revealing the exhaustion beneath. He panted softly. This kind of manipulation was too mentally taxing. Just a moment's effort, and barely covering the area of a hand, had already stretched his energy to its limit, leaving him unable to continue. But he had succeeded, proving that his understanding of the story of Flame Bella was correct. As expected, learning magic and applying it are two different things. Learning a spell isn't the end, but rather the beginning. Only deft application of a spell can be considered true mastery. He'd done these things before, like using the levitation charm to punish Malfoy and the softening charm to soften the rock cake. But only today, after almost a year of study, did he truly understand and take this principle to heart. Before, it had been just a vague idea. After resting for a moment and regaining his strength, Guan Qiong waved his wand, causing the tail of flame to float before him again. Flame Bella wasn't his greatest discovery in the book, it was simply more realistic and easier to realize. After all, it was a true story. While he couldn't yet transform into a flaming giant, he had made a beginning. All that remained was practice. And he had never been shy about devoting time to magical practice. Guan Qiong flipped through Tales of Flame and came to the final story, Laval, the Avenger. This story wasn't based on the author's own experience, but it wasn't entirely fabricated either. It came from legends he'd heard during his travels. Laval was a dark wizard, living in the shadows. One day, during a wizard duel, he was consumed by the intense flames of his opponent. His right hand was reduced to ash, and half his face was charred, like a demon. Furthermore, his opponent cursed his wounds, preventing them from healing until Laval's death. I will return. I will inflict upon you the pain I have endured. I will show you what true fire feels like. Before fleeing, Laval screamed, his throat also burned, but he still uttered the most piercing curses at his opponent through his nearly charred voice. But no one cared. Laval's opponents didn't even think of pursuing him. It was his right hand that Laval had lost, and almost everyone wielded their wands with their right. Laval was completely crippled, with only his left remaining, barely a tenth of his former strength. As time passed, Laval was almost forgotten. Like those who died in a duel. But he returned, seeking revenge. No one knew how he had managed it, but his cursed hand grew back, far more powerful than before. Everyone's magic was unleashed, but Laval blocked it with his right hand, as if it were made of iron. But even iron shattered under the wizard's spells. His spells became unstoppable. Perhaps fueled by the rage within him, or perhaps by the long-suppressed desire for revenge, no one could stand up to him. Finally, he confronted his former rival and defeated him with a single blow, his right hand blocking all his attacks. How is this possible? His opponent exclaimed in astonishment. Laval grabbed his opponent's neck with his newly grown right hand and lifted him up. "Nothing is impossible," he said with a cruel smile. "I told you I would return, to make you suffer the pain I once endured, to show you the true power of fire." Flames erupted from Laval's right hand, consuming his glove and his entire right sleeve, revealing the arm beneath. It was an arm made entirely of fire, ablaze with countless flames, yet seemingly solid. Its blazing light shone in Laval's opponent's eyes, and the flames licked half of his face, causing him to howl. He endured the pain he had once inflicted on Laval, and was then consumed by Laval's flames, reduced to a charred corpse. End of story. Laval's fate was uncertain, and it was even unclear whether he even existed. After all, an arm made of fire, possessing physical form, capable of lifting a man, seemed implausible. The author of The Legend of Flame saved this hearsay story for the end, noting that he had only heard the legend but was unsure of its authenticity. But Guan Qiong believed it to be true. There was no other reason, just something like intuition that made him feel this event was real. He also felt a certain connection between Laval's story and Flame Bella's, though he couldn't quite figure out the connection. But it undoubtedly pointed him to a different path from Flame Bella's. Control flames, make them possess physical form. He had a hunch that if he mastered this technique, his power would skyrocket, surpassing even Flame Bella's. But how? He had no idea. Guan Qiong waved his wand, and flames emerged from the tip. He seemed to control them, shaping them into a fixed shape, but he could only manage a tiny bit. The flames' constant pulsation and shifting made control difficult. Even with his magical circuits, Guan Qiong could only manage simple geometric shapes, a sphere, a long stick, a cube. And none of them were standard, twisted and distorted. Guan Qiong scratched his head, controlling the flames, making them change color and move, occasionally exploding into fireworks. The room suddenly became lively with crackling sounds. Chapter 67 Examination. Time sped up amid the chirping of cicadas, the weather quickly grew sweltering, the summer sun embracing the sky, the world bright and pure. The end-of-year exams arrived as scheduled, and students entered the classroom with trepidation yet anticipation. However, when faced with the actual questions, they calmed down, even gazing at the azure sky in the distance and dreaming of their summer vacations. Guan Qiong was no exception, though, of course, he wasn't apprehensive. The history of magic exams were most similar to those he'd experienced in his previous life. Confined in a stuffy classroom, they used uniform, anti-cheating quills. Students were spaced far apart, unable to communicate with one another, even eye contact was forbidden by Professor Binz. Guan Qiong almost thought he was taking the Gaokao. However, the questions on the paper brought him back to reality. After all, Gaokao didn't test the name and founding period of a magical empire, nor did they examine the causes of its decline and destruction. Of course, other topics included the founding and purpose of the Werewolf Council, the attitudes of medieval wizards towards humans, and the Elven Rebellion. Of course, none of these stumped Guan Qiong. He answered them all. The only question on the entire test that puzzled him was a single one, the nature of the magical world and how magic works. 10 points. This question was far too complex for a first-year wizard to answer, and there was likely no standard answer. At least in the books Guan Qiong had read so far, the subject was only hinted at, with no definitive answer. However, Guan Qiong figured this question was one of those low-scoring or observational questions, requiring only a bit of free thinking. The professor probably didn't think anyone could answer such a complex question. After all, even they themselves weren't sure. Guan Qiong thought about it and decided it was a difficult question. He sighed and began to scribble. He did have some ideas, but there was no need to overdo it. After all, no one knew how to do it, and it wouldn't affect their final grade. The charms exam was a practical one. Professor Flitwick would call students into the classroom one by one and have them perform the spells they had learned that year. The students would be graded based on the effectiveness of their magic. The main scoring items were the levitation charm, the flaming charm, and the softening charm. The easier and more effective these three spells were, the better the score, earning at least 80 points. The unlocking charm and the locking charm accounted for the remaining 20 points. Guan Qiong, of course, received full marks. As he cast these spells silently, controlling them as if they were his own fingers, Professor Flitwick's eyes widened and his mouth dropped open. "You'll get full marks, I promise. You'll live up to Dumbledore's expectations. Of course, I can see you've put in a lot of effort, child," Professor Flitwick wrote a 100 on the grading parchment and said to Guan Qiong gently, "Thank you, Professor Flitwick." A light appeared, hovering in front of Flitwick. "You deserve it. I'm very proud of you, child," Professor Flitwick said. "Okay, your exam's over. Could you please call Mr. Weasley on your way out?" Gwen nodded, walked out of the classroom, nodded to the nervous trio, and let Ron in. Ron stuttered inside, and after a moment, came out with a grimace on his face. "I messed up." The pineapple was dancing in place, and the softening spell on the floor didn't catch it when it fell, so it just shattered. "The fire spell only sparked a few sparks," Ron said dejectedly. "Oh, Ron, don't worry, it should be fine. Everyone else's grades are bad, so Professor Flitwick will probably let us off," Harry reassured him. "Okay, I hope you'll say the same thing later." "You're next, Harry," Ron said. Harry's face also turned grim, and he walked stiffly into the classroom. Gwen and Hermione exchanged a glance and shrugged. They were the least worried about the exam. Hermione was a little nervous at first, but she relaxed when she saw Gwen's calm expression. "Well, I did my best, but it's a shame I only got 90 points. After Hermione finished her exam and left the classroom, she told Gwen, a look of regret and relief on her face. She estimated that even if she couldn't get a perfect score, she'd probably get 95 points. After all, she'd cast all the spells accurately, without any mistakes. But Professor Flitwick obviously disagreed and only gave her a 90. The Transfiguration exam was similar to Charms, except that they had to transform a mouse into a snuff box, which Gwen also completed successfully. Although her main focus was on magic and charms, she also practiced Transfiguration regularly, but the content there wasn't much use to her at the moment, so it wasn't her priority. Potions class involved mixing a potion, the potion of amnesia. The young wizards looked as if they'd already drunk the potion, especially Harry and Ron. Under Snape's icy gaze, their heads went blank, forgetting everything they'd previously memorized. Fortunately, Snape wasn't just staring at them. After Guan Qiong was the first to raise her hand to indicate she was finished, Snape left them and came to Guan Qiong's side. Very, very good. Snape looked at the gray-green potion in Guan Qiong's cauldron. There wasn't a trace of impurities or any excess. It was obvious that the proportions of the various herbs were perfect, and the technique and timing were impeccable. Snape rarely expressed admiration. He looked into Guan Qiong's eyes, which matched his own, and said, "A truly perfect talent. If you are willing to delve into potions, you will achieve no less glory than Dumbledore." "Thank you very much, Professor Snape." Guan Qiong didn't respond directly. "I hope you will consider this carefully. You are a wise man, unlike some fools." Snape turned his head sharply, his eyes cold and indifferent as he looked at Harry and Ron. Cold sweat broke out on Harry and Ron's backs. The memory they had just regained faded again, and the potion in front of them was only halfway mixed. But there was no time to stop now. They had no choice but to bite the bullet and put in whatever remaining ingredients they could to complete their potion. The potion began to emit a strange smell and turned a strange, disgusting color, but it was finally completed. Snape quickly walked over to the two of them and looked at the forgetfulness potion they had created. His brow furrowed, a mocking expression on his face. "If you're willing to drink it, I might consider giving you full marks." He looked at Ron until he bowed his head deeply. Snape turned back to Harry, but his emerald green eyes wavered. "But you certainly wouldn't dare. That's a shame. You can only get 60 points, which is probably the lowest score for a first-year wizard, but I think it suits you just fine." Snape walked away indifferently, heading towards the next person to mix the potion, leaving Harry and Ron staring at each other in bewilderment. They actually passed. If they weren't still in the classroom, they would probably hug each other and cheer loudly. "Ms. Granger, 95 points, not bad," Snape's voice echoed, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop, but everyone's hearts, like the ever-burning alcohol lamp, began to come alive. Note, for ease of understanding, the grade scale has been changed from OEAPDT to a percentage system. Chapter 68 The Real Exam. Not all of Harry and Ron's exams were botched. Harry, for one, fared well in flying, outperforming both Gwen and Hermione, completing several challenging aerial maneuvers and landing flawlessly for a perfect score of 95. As for Ron, while his performance wasn't particularly impressive, it was decent enough, given the time Hermione had been pushing him through the studying. If it weren't for Snape's overwhelming pressure, they wouldn't have had any trouble with potions. Of the remaining exams, Aside from Gwen's underwhelming performance in flying, where she only scored 80 points, all the others received full marks or near-perfect scores. After all, the defense against the dark arts, astronomy, and herbology exams all involved completing paperwork, and Gwen was incredibly skilled at it, as if he'd returned to his former life. After all, the wizards began to relax. This was their happiest time, free from the pressure of studying and able to hang out with friends. Even their holidays back home weren't as joyful as this. Gwen, however, avoided the trio and headed alone to the 4th floor. He was going to take his final exams. Of course, his main curiosity was about the Philosopher's Stone. He wanted to see what it actually looked like, and then, through a magical lens, see its circuitry. It would be even better if he could find a magic circuit that could turn anything into gold. He was quite short of money right now. Guan Qiong walked out to the 4th floor corridor, to the door, and took out his wand, aiming it at the lock. The wooden door was locked with a locking spell, presumably cast by Dumbledore, but it wasn't difficult to unlock. The spiraling circuitry didn't extend very far, and even a junior wizard could easily undo it. Guan Qiong placed his wand against the lock, controlling the magic to form a reverse spiral. The lock clicked, and the door swung open. Guan Qiong pushed it open and entered. The first thing he saw was a monstrous dog with 3 large heads and a fierce look in his eyes. It was the first level, Hagrid's pet, Fluffy, a 3-headed dog, said to have come from hell, but actually hailing from India. But now, it stared at the suddenly opened door with a puzzled expression on its face. Its 3 heads separated, sniffing the air as its eyes searched the room intently, as if searching for the intruder. But to no avail. Even after passing Guan Qiong several times, it failed to detect Guan Qiong. It was as if its eyes had suddenly gone blind, its nose ineffective. Guan Qiong gazed at the 3-headed dog, Fluffy, with a curious expression. The wand in his right hand emanated a faint silver light, enveloping Fluffy's entire body, extinguishing his presence and blending completely with the surroundings. A presence-dispelling charm. After a month of practice, he had finally mastered this magic, learned from unicorns. While it wasn't yet at its full potential, it was more than enough to confuse the 3-headed dog. After all, the 3-headed dog wasn't a particularly intelligent magical creature. The dog saw Guan Qiong and could smell him, but the presence-dispelling charm tricked it into thinking his presence was legitimate, like the floor or the bricks in the wall, belonging to the room, and so it subconsciously ignored him. This is the biggest difference between a disappearance charm and an invisibility charm. It doesn't prevent others from seeing it, but rather allows them to ignore it once they've seen it. Just as people wouldn't find a blade of grass on the lawn unremarkable, or a fallen leaf in the woods strange-looking, as if it didn't belong there. Guan Qiong activated his magical perspective and began observing the 3-headed dog. Through his magical vision, Fluffy's 3 heads possessed distinct magical circuits. The center one was the most uniform, while the left one was covered in thorn-like protrusions. The right one, on the other hand, was sunken inward, like a devouring black hole. How interesting, Guan Qiong thought to himself, taking a step forward and approaching the 3-headed dog. By this time, the dog had given up searching, believing there were no intruders and that the door had likely just been blown open by the wind. Guan Qiong stood before it, opening his hand to compare it to its enormous, drooling mouth. It felt like it could devour him in one bite. It seemed that Snape's injury was at most a nibble from the 3-headed dog. Otherwise, Snape's leg might not have been saved, and would likely have required amputation below the abdomen. Guan Qiong now spotted the trapdoor behind the 3-headed dog and approached it. He pulled it open, and the sound caused the 3-headed dog to turn its head, but it only stared in confusion. After sniffing to confirm the absence of any unwanted scent, it turned its head back, nodding its head away. Guan Qiong stared at the pitch-black cave entrance before him. The depth seemed bottomless, a source of deep fear. Guan Qiong snapped his left fingers, and a light appeared, drifting downward, illuminating the area around him. He gently waved his wand, dispelling the presence dispeller and casting the levitation charm, applying it to himself. His body levitated, and under his control, he drifted downward toward the cave entrance. His presence once again caught the 3-headed dog's attention, but by the time the dog turned back, Guan Qiong had already entered the cave entrance and closed the trapdoor. The entire tunnel was dark, cold, and damp, a stark contrast to the scorching summer heat outside. Guan Qiong's illumination spell only illuminated a limited area of the tunnel. The smooth walls surrounding it showed that the tunnel had been dug and renovated. The tunnel was long, and Guan Qiong drifted for over 10 minutes before reaching the bottom. The illumination spell now illuminated the surrounding area. Countless vines tangled together like snakes, covering the ground and walls ahead, leaving only a small opening in the middle. Devil's Snare. Guan Qiong called out their names in his mind. As if sensing Guan Qiong's presence, the Devil's Snare spun countless snake-like tendrils toward him, attempting to entangle him. Guan Qiong suspended the levitation spell and let himself fall to the ground. Tendrils began to crawl from the ground, preparing to wrap around his feet. But Guan Qiong remained undeterred. He gently shook his wand. Crimson flames flew from the tip of his wand, transforming into a thin rope of fire under Guan Qiong's control. It swirled around his body, forming a defensive ring like a writhing snake. The devil's snares that tried to entangle Guan Qiong twisted, twitched, and retreated when they sensed the flames surrounding him, clearing a path for him. Guan Qiong walked forward, extinguishing the surrounding flames only after passing through the devil's snares. After practicing for a while, he had already mastered the basic form of the fire spell. But he still had a long way to go before he could reach Flame Bella and Laval. However, he wasn't in a hurry, he had plenty of time. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 69, Breakthrough. Guan Qiong continued along the path. The air was thick with chill, and the moisture in the air condensed into droplets upon contact with the walls, dripping onto the ground with a pattering sound. At the end of the path, Guan Qiong came upon a brightly lit room with a vaulted ceiling, so high it almost reached 2 stories. Throughout the room, countless winged geese whirled around like a flock of birds, their metallic bodies reflecting the light from the dome, making them dazzling and eye-catching. On the opposite side of the room stood a heavy wooden door. Guan Qiong crossed the room and reached the door. The keys flew on their own without attacking him. He activated his magical perspective, and it was clear that the locking spell on this door was much stronger than the outermost one. The spiraling magical circuits were nearly 7 times that of the outer door, making it impossible for a junior wizard to open it with an unlocking charm. But Guan Qiong could. He took out his wand and pointed it at the lock. But he lowered his wand again and looked at the keys in the sky. He wasn't going to fight Voldemort or save the Philosopher's Stone, so there was no need to rush. This trip was more like a test of his own magical abilities, so he decided to try other methods to pass the level. Guan Qiong gazed upward. From his magical perspective, he could see that the countless keys swirling in the air shared the same magical circuits, meaning they were all enchanted by the same spell. But one of them was different. It looked identical to the others, but from the magical perspective, it had 2 layers of circuits, one that allowed it to sprout wings and fly, and the other, a spiraling circuit. It was an unlocking charm, and it was the same length as the locking charm on the door behind Guan Qiong, meaning that key could open the door. Guan Qiong looked elsewhere in the room and, sure enough, found brooms in the corner. There were more than one. Clearly the creator of this level had thought everything through. However, Guan Qiong didn't reach for the brooms. This was indeed a way to pass the level, but it was more suitable for Harry and his friends. Guan Qiong gazed at the keys flying in mid-air like a flock of birds and came up with a third method. He waved his wand, and 12 levitation charms instantly launched, striking each of the 12 keys. This was the culmination of a year's practice. If the shattered porcelain were piled up, it would likely fill the entire room. Yet, it was precisely because of the porcelain's sacrifice that he was able to control multiple levitation charms simultaneously, each one precisely targeting its target. The keys struck by the levitation charm were imbued with a buoyancy equal to their own gravity. This sudden boost didn't speed them up, but instead caused them to lose control of their direction. Like drunken birds, the 12 keys flew in all directions, colliding with one another and throwing the entire cluster into chaos. Guan Qiong smiled softly and cancelled the 12 levitation charms, but the 12 keys didn't return to normal. The sudden force of gravity sent them flying downward, where they collided with the keys flying upward. Guan Qiong waved his wand again, and 12 levitation charms flew out, acting on the remaining keys. As before, those keys, unable to control themselves, collided with each other at breakneck speed. As Guan Qiong continued to cast the levitation charm, The chaos in the cluster of keys grew, spreading from a single point to the entire cluster. Keys began to fall to the ground, struggling to keep their wings afloat, unable to take flight. Finally, Guan Qiong cast a levitation charm on the remaining 7 keys still in flight, causing them to lose control and crash into the wall before finally falling. By this point, all the keys had fallen to the ground, flapping their broken wings, but none could fly. Guan Qiong activated his magical vision and located the key with the unlocking charm. He picked it up and inserted it into the keyhole. With a firm twist, the unlocking charm and the locking charm intertwined, dissipating. With a click, the lock popped open, and the wooden door was opened by Guan Qiong. Guan Qiong looked towards the second room, about to enter, but then turned back to gaze at the mess behind him. This level is quite interesting, it would be a shame for the trio not to try it. Guan Qiong thought to himself, picking up the key and preparing to cast an unlocking spell on it, only to discover that it was actually growing magical circuits. He turned to look at the door lock, and sure enough, it was also growing magical circuits, the spirals of the locking spell. At that moment, a key began to flutter up from the ground, its scars from the previous collision completely gone, revealing a completely new appearance. Guan Qiong scratched his head and casually tossed the key away. He had considered using a large-scale repair spell, but it seemed unnecessary. The magic here was far more advanced than he had imagined. At least this method of automatically growing magical circuits was something he had never seen or imagined before. Guan Qiong looked up at the light streaming down from the dome. There were also magical circuits there, but they were so complex and intricate that Guan Qiong had previously overlooked them. However, Guan Qiong suspected that the current situation was related to the light. Unfortunately, at his current level, he wasn't yet capable of understanding and learning this level of magic. He was only a first year. Guan Qiong abandoned these thoughts and turned toward the second room. The wooden door closed as he stepped through it, muffling the fluttering of countless wings. The second room was initially dark, but suddenly lit up as Guan Qiong entered, illuminating the entire room. Before Guan Qiong lay a massive chessboard, dotted with black and white pieces. Each one was twice Guan Qiong's height, similar to the trolls he had encountered earlier. Next to him was a black piece, and across from him was a white one. Behind the white pieces stood a wooden door similar to the one he had just encountered. As Guan Qiong stepped forward, the soldiers within the white pieces stood up, their swords drawn from their backs, crossing their arms to block his advance. But he simply wanted to see how the pieces' magical circuits operated. As expected, he couldn't understand it. The transfiguration spell Professor McGonagall was performing was a highly advanced technique, one he couldn't yet comprehend. So, which one should he choose? Guan Qiong looked at the black chess pieces, which included the king, bishop, queen, castle, knight, and soldiers. Of course, soldiers were not considered, as they were pure cannon fodder. He looked at the bishop and queen. Logically, these two were the strongest and most likely to survive to the end. However, Guan Qiong took out a bottle of potion from his pocket with a smile on his face. It was the thoughts that Professor Snape gave him for Christmas. He drank a third of the potion, and the slightly cool liquid slid down his throat. A wonderful magic circuit appeared around him, connecting to his brain. "I choose the king," a gentle voice appeared. It was the voice that came from Guan Qiong's heart, and it was also the voice of his previous life. He looked at the position of the king and said so. Chapter 70, Battle of Kings. Guan Qiong walked before the Black King. The Black King looked at him, removed his crown, and placed it in Guan Qiong's hand. The crown began to shrink, becoming as large as Guan Qiong's head, making it easier for Guan Qiong to wear it. The Black King also began to transform, his body melting into black molten iron, then being recast until it became a black throne. Guan Qiong sat on the throne and put on the crown. The base of the throne continued to rise, allowing him to see the entire chessboard. When everything was ready, a white pawn moved forward 2 squares, starting the game. Guan Qiong began to command the black pieces. The way to win in wizard chess is to knock down the opponent's king, similar to Chinese chess, with a few minor differences. For example, it lacks the Chu River and Han River, and for example, it lacks cannons, but it does have 8 pawns. Guan Qiong had occasionally played wizard chess with Harry, Ron, and Hermione as a daily pastime, but it wasn't often. Yet, his chess skills were still respectable. A trio rarely defeated him. After all, he had the mind of an adult, could see the situation holistically, and was generally calmer. But the overall situation on the chessboard now made him feel a little nervous. Guan Qiong's expression darkened as he looked at the White Queen, who was slaughtering his soldiers. The difficulty of this chessboard seemed to vary depending on the opponent. He had initially been careless, thinking that if Ron could win, he would have an easy time. But now the situation had changed. The opponent's skill was almost equal to his, and his carelessness had led to a few minor losses. Fortunately, he reacted quickly and only lost a few soldiers, allowing him to stabilize the situation. Looking at the white pieces attacking him from all sides, the black pieces surrounding him, and the door behind the white pieces, Guan Qiong's face broke into a smile. His goal wasn't to win the game, but to pass this level and enter the door. So, attack. Forward, Guan Qiong called out, and his throne moved forward 1 square, pointing directly at the opposing king. The battle raged fiercely across the chessboard. Knights charged, bishops faced, soldiers collided, and the debris of the dead formed a tangled black and white path across the board. Guan Qiong's throne, guarded by the Black Queen and the castle, advanced along this bloodless path. Forward. Forward. Only forward. The number of black pieces dwindled, and so did the number of white pieces. Guan Qiong's mastery of the art of exchanging pieces was evident in the game, and at this moment, he wielded it to its fullest potential. The scattered remains of white and black corpses on the ground formed a black and white painting depicting indifference and ruthlessness. With 5 moves to the White King, the Black Castle blocked the White Knight's final charge, and the White Knight was slain by the Black Queen. With 3 moves to the White King, the Black Queen stood before him, kneeling on one knee, saluted the Black King, and was then shattered by the charging White Queen. Guan Qiong crushed the White Queen with his throne, reducing her to shattered pieces. Finally, Guan Qiong and the White King faced each other, with only a single empty space between them. Whoever stepped forward first would die. Forward, a cold, commanding voice rang out. Guan Qiong, now seemingly transformed into a true king, wielded his throne and advanced 1 square. The Black King and the White King faced each other, and behind the White King lay the door to the next level. The White King swung his scepter, intending to deliver a final blow to Guan Qiong, but paused mid-swing. Guan Qiong's dark pupils shone with a silvery white light, and a vast amount of magic power surged from him, rushing into the White King's body before him. He couldn't understand the magic circuits of the chess pieces, but that didn't mean he couldn't influence them. The excessive magic power hindered their operation, causing the White King to freeze and become unable to move. Forward, with Guan Qiong's voice, the Black Throne relentlessly crushed the White King, securing victory in this duel between kings. The remaining chess pieces paused, staring at the lone king on the field, dropping their weapons and saluting him. Guan Qiong sighed softly, stood up, removed the crown from his head, and placed it on the throne. The chessboard began to heal, countless fragments healing under the white light overhead, transforming into chess pieces one by one, each returning to its place. The Black and White Kings wore solemn expressions, the Black and White Queens expressionless. The knights stood in battle formation, the soldiers' morale high. Everything returned to its original state, as if nothing had happened. Perhaps only Guan Qiong remembered the silent battle. A heartfelt smile spread across his face. This enlarged version of wizard chess was indeed much more interesting than the regular ones. It felt immersive, and Guan Qiong was having a blast. If it weren't for the more exciting things to come, he would have been tempted to play 2 more games. Guan Qiong walked to the wooden door, opened it, and walked into the next room. Well, not so interesting after all. I actually forgot about this level. Guan Qiong thought, covering his nose with his clothes. A sickening, unimaginable stench filled the room, nearly making the unprepared Guan Qiong vomit. A troll appeared before Guan Qiong, but it wasn't the one she'd encountered the previous Christmas. This one was even larger, and its scent was even stronger. The troll sat on the ground, dazed. When he saw Guan Qiong open the door, he instantly became excited, howling loudly and rising to his feet, his thick wooden club in hand. Guan Qiong stared at the troll, not even bothering to wave his wand. A point of light appeared out of nowhere and floated in front of the troll. Like the last troll, this troll was immediately captivated by the light, his eyes nearly cross-eyed as he stared at it. Guan Qiong covered her nose and manipulated the light points into a line. The line then twisted, forming a semicircular, inward-spinning spiral that spun before the troll's eyes. Soon, the troll began to feel dizzy. He pounded his head, trying to clear his mind, but it didn't work and only made him feel more dizzy. The troll staggered back and forth in the room, as if it was drunk. It wanted to control its body, but it couldn't. One of its 2 feet was always hanging in the air, and the ground seemed to be as soft as cotton candy, making it unable to exert any strength. Finally, with a loud bang, the troll fell to the ground and fainted. Guan Qiong walked past a troll and looked at this troll that was stronger than the last time, feeling a little emotional. The troll was indeed a brainless creature. It was just a lighting spell that made it dizzy. Thinking about it this way, I was really too immature before. It took all my magic power to fight a troll. Guan Qiong shook my head, opened the next door, and quickly left the room. It was really smelly. Chapter 71, Puzzle Solving in Guan Qiong in the Mirror of Erased. Guan Qiong arrived at the 4th room. As he crossed the threshold, purple flames erupted from both above and below the wooden door, blocking his escape route. At the same time, flames also appeared in front of the door to the next room, but these were black. In the center of the room stood a single table, upon which lay 7 bottles of various shapes. Next to the bottles lay a scroll of parchment. Guan Qiong didn't examine the parchment first, but instead used his magical vision to examine the 7 bottles on the table. He knew the contents of the parchment well. While he couldn't memorize it word for word, he understood the general meaning. 7 bottles, 3 poisons, 2 wines, and 2 potions. One offered immunity to the purple flames behind, and one offered immunity to the black flames in front. The rest was a matter of logical relationships, who was next to whom, who couldn't possibly be in the center or leftmost position, and so on. He then had to infer the antidote's location by analyzing the people present. However, Guan Qiong had another method. He used his magical vision to examine the 7 bottles. As he expected, only 2 bottles contained complete magic circuits, because they were potions. In the remaining bottles, the poison and wine only had weak magic power, but no complete circuits. Then Guan Qiong picked up the parchment and looked at the contents. The second one said that the contents of the bottles on the left and right could not help him move forward. The bottles with complete magic circuits were the 3rd and 7th bottles. Based on this, it was obvious that if Guan Qiong wanted to move forward, he only needed to drink the potion in the 3rd bottle. Simple. Guan Qiong felt relieved, but did not pick up the potion. Just like some top students like to solve problems in multiple ways, Guan Qiong already knew the answer, but now he wanted to use the normal method to find the antidote. In other words, to solve this reasoning. After all, he was not in a hurry, and there was no Voldemort ahead for him to stop. For him, this was completely a game of passing levels. Guan Qiong began to carefully read the rules on the parchment. It was actually quite simple. Besides the 3 bottles of poison, 2 bottles of potion, and 2 bottles of wine mentioned earlier, the remaining rules were: 1. The poison must be to the left of the wine. 2. The leftmost and rightmost bottles contain different substances, and neither is a potion immune to black flames. 3. The bottles are of different shapes and sizes. The largest bottle, 6th from the left, and the smallest bottle, 3rd from the left, do not contain poison. 4. The second bottle from the left, 2nd from the left, and the second bottle from the right, 6th from the left, contain the same substance. See attached picture. It's actually quite simple. Guan Qiong pondered the rules on the parchment. First, arrange the bottles in order, from left to right, from 1 to 7. Then, based on the commonality between the 3rd and 4th points, we can conclude that the 6th bottle from the left contains neither poison nor potion, because the 6th and 2nd bottles contain the same substance, while the 2 potions are different. Therefore, the 6th and 2nd bottles from the left are wine. Based on the first point, it can be deduced that the first bottle on the left is poison, while the 7th bottle on the left, the rightmost one, is definitely not poison. Furthermore, based on the second point, the 1st and 7th bottles on the left cannot advance, so the 7th bottle is a potion that makes one immune to the purple flames that push one backward. Only the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th bottles on the left remain undetermined, leaving 2 poison bottles and 1 potion that makes one advance. The 3rd bottle on the left is the smallest, and based on the 3rd point, it doesn't contain poison. Therefore, the potion that makes one immune to the black flames must be in the 3rd bottle. Guan Qiong deduced the entire process in his mind, contentedly picking up the 3rd small bottle and downing the potion in one gulp. He grumbled a little, as if drinking a bottle of water fresh from an ice cellar, but he could also see a complex magical circuit appearing on his body, protecting it. He walked forward, the black flames licking his body, but he felt nothing, as if they were just an illusion. Guan Qiong opened the door to the last room and stepped inside. The room was considerably larger than the previous one. Candles hung along the walls, illuminating the entire space with a brilliant glow. In the center of the room stood a magnificent mirror, reaching as high as the ceiling. Its frame was golden and supported by two claw-like feet. A line of words was engraved on the top of the mirror: Eris, Stella, Erlu, Ayatubi, Kafru, Ayawang, Vos. Mirror of Erased. Guan Qiong gazed at the mirror, his eyes clearly lighting up. He walked over to it and took in the entirety of it. The reflection showed him now, black hair, dark eyes, and handsome features. His face had lost some of its childishness, appearing calmer. Compared to last year, he had grown considerably taller and stronger, thanks largely to the abundant meats at Hogwarts and Hagrid's rock biscuits. However, as the magic power from the Mirror of Erased connected to Guan Qiong, the contents of the mirror began to change. Guan Qiong's face began to mature, rapidly growing from 12 to 18, then to 22, before finally pausing. His clothing also changed, no longer a wizard's robe, but loose, casual clothes. His face wore a relaxed expression, and a camera slung across his chest. The background shifted constantly, from the Great Wall to tropical rainforest, from the Dragon's Lair to the Thunder Valley, all places Guan Qiong had read about and longed to visit. Guan Qiong smiled as he watched the scene, his eyes remaining clear. This was indeed what he desired, but the mirror wouldn't be enough to seduce him. A traveler isn't satisfied simply watching travel videos, they must actually experience the scenery. However, as the magic power flowing into him increased, the objects in the mirror began to change, the camera became more advanced, and a square metal block appeared in Guan Qiong's hand. Okay, that's it. Guan Qiong let his magic surge, forming a tidal wave around him, blocking all the magic from the Mirror of Erased. The mirror, like a lake with a stone thrown into it, created ripples before returning to calm. Guan Qiong's true self was now reflected. Guan Qiong breathed a sigh of relief. Honestly, if he hadn't had this little trick to circumvent the Mirror of Erased, he wouldn't have dared come here. If something like an iPhone 14 appeared in the mirror, it would be hard to explain. He knew Dumbledore had a way of knowing what had been reflected in the mirror. Chapter 72: The Philosopher's Stone and Dumbledore. How could he obtain the Philosopher's Stone? Guan Qiong pondered, gazing at the Mirror of Erased before him. Dumbledore had hidden the Philosopher's Stone within it, that was certain. Dumbledore's condition for obtaining the stone seemed to be that only those who sought to find it, but didn't use it, could obtain it. Guan Qiong certainly wanted to find the stone, but the Mirror of Erased clearly interpreted his desire to observe it as using it, thus failing to meet the conditions. Guan Qiong scratched his head, wondering if his trip had been in vain. He activated his magical vision and observed the mirror before him, seeking alternatives. The Mirror of Erased's own magical circuitry was incredibly complex, one Guan Qiong couldn't clearly see or understand. But above it lay another layer of circuitry. That layer was equally complex, yet fundamentally different from the Mirror of Erased's own. Guan Qiong's eyes widened slightly. This circuitry was unlike any other Guan Qiong had ever seen, it was incomplete. At a certain point, there was a small gap. This gap moved along the magic circuit, making the entire circuit look like a long snake, entangled and chasing its tail, trying to bite it. An incomplete magic circuit. Guan Qiong seemed to have a thought. He took out his wand and aimed it at the gap. With the help of magic vision, this was not difficult, almost like tracing a pattern. Then, he slowly channeled his magic power, connecting it to the snake's head and tail. There were some difficulties, but not too many. It was just a matter of controlling the magic output, maintaining the right amount, not too much, not too little. After a while, Guan Qiong finally filled the gap. The magic circuit was complete and radiated a bright light. The Guan Qiong in the mirror began to change. He looked at the Guan Qiong outside the mirror, smiled, and then reached into his pocket and pulled out a red stone. After blinking at Guan Qiong, the Guan Qiong in the mirror put the stone into his pocket. Guan Qiong felt his clothes tremble momentarily, like a heavy object dropping into his pocket. Success. Guan Qiong reached into his pocket and felt a warm stone. It was smooth, like a pebble. He took the stone out and placed it in his palm. The stone wasn't particularly unusual in appearance. If it were dropped on the ground, no one would likely consider it significant. But Guan Qiong could sense its aura, a strange, indescribable aura. It was probably the scent of gold, iron, silver, copper, and aluminum mixed together, with grass juice and muddy water added, then heated with an alcohol lamp. It was strange, yet comforting. Guan Qiong didn't forget the purpose of his visit. He activated his magical vision and looked at the stone. A single glance and Guan Qiong instantly raised his head, a bloody nose streaming from his nose. His head was dizzy, as if he'd taken a 20-hour train, a 20-hour bus, and then a 20-hour boat ride. He suppressed the discomfort and restrained himself from vomiting, while controlling his hand and placing the stone in his pocket. After a few heavy gasps, Guan Qiong clutched his head and swallowed hard before finally feeling some relief. He quickly turned off his magic vision, breathing heavily with lingering fear. That had nearly crashed his system. The magic circuitry of the Philosopher's Stone was incredibly complex. It felt like the entire blueprint of the Pentagon had been twisted and reassembled according to the 8 diagrams, replicated 7 times, and then stuffed into the stone. Furthermore, the stone possessed a mysterious power. The moment he observed it through his magic vision, the stone's entire circuitry flowed into his mind, capturing everything, every detail, forcibly engraved into his brain, leaving him no time to react. Guan Qiong couldn't even think of the word Philosopher's Stone, fearing that recalling it would cause his brain to crash again. He was certain that if he could recall it, he would be able to recall every pattern and detail, with absolute accuracy. But the result was definitely not what he expected. After resting for a while, Guan Qiong looked at the mirror of Aries before him, slowly reaching into his pocket and pulling out the Philosopher's Stone. He didn't glance at the stone the entire time, even after turning off his magical vision. Looking at the mirror of Aries, Guan Qiong felt a dilemma. How should he put it back? As for taking it away, forget it. He'd probably be whisked away to the headmaster's office for tea and a heart-to-heart the moment he left this room. Besides, the Philosopher's Stone had no effect on him right now. Immortality? He was only 12, too early to even think about that. Turning stone into gold? That might be helpful, but he was afraid he'd explode if he used it. Besides, he had ways to make money. He wouldn't become extremely wealthy, but he could certainly afford to have enough food and clothing. And holding on to it would only make Voldemort want to target him. The noseless man was a lunatic, and he didn't want to provoke him just yet. He didn't want to help Harry defeat his enemies. It would be a thankless task. Overall, holding on to it would only do harm, not good. It wouldn't significantly contribute to his development, so he might as well put it back. He'd come to the challenge just to get a glimpse of the Philosopher's Stone, not expecting anything more. Just throw it in, a voice called out from behind Guan Qiong, completely unannounced. A wave of emotion welled up in Guan Qiong's heart, and she turned to look at Dumbledore, who had suddenly appeared. His bright blue eyes peered through his half-moon spectacles, a look of approval on his face. Just throw it in. The Mirror of Aries will take good care of it, Dumbledore repeated, his voice gentle and unhurried. Guan Qiong nodded and tossed the Philosopher's Stone into the air. Sure enough, the Mirror of Aries, like a lake, absorbed the stone. Ripples appeared and vanished, and the Mirror of Aries returned to its calm state. The Philosopher's Stone, however, had vanished, and the incomplete magical circuits had reappeared, waiting for the next person to fill them. I didn't expect you to be the first to arrive here, June. You don't seem like the kind of child who would be curious about this place, Dumbledore said to Guan Qiong. When he saw Guan Qiong throw the Philosopher's Stone back, his expression softened, and his tone became gentle. There was no accusation in his voice, as if this was just a casual chat between a student and the headmaster. I am a Gryffindor, after all. A light appeared between Guan Qiong and Dumbledore, forming a line of words. Oh, yes, I forgot that. I always thought you should go to Ravenclaw, but the Sorting Hat seems to have its own ideas, Dumbledore said with a smile. He looked around. Then back at Guan Qiong, and said, I wonder if you would like to come to my office and talk. I have something I want to ask you, with pleasure, Guan Qiong nodded. Chapter 73 What is Magic? Guan Qiong looked around. This was his first time in Dumbledore's office. It was a spacious, circular room filled with a wealth of objects, oddly shaped, smoking silverware, portraits of former headmasters, and a tattered, wrinkled wizard's hat. Rather than the headmaster's office, it looked more like a family storage room that hadn't been opened in years, the only difference being a thin layer of dust. But there was more to it than just these things. Behind the door, perched high on a gilded branch, stood an aging bird. Its feathers had fallen off, and it looked listless, its eyes half-lidded, as if they would close at any moment. Guan Qiong knew this bird, the western phoenix, Dumbledore's pet, Fawkes. He reached out his hand, and Fawkes wasn't afraid of him. Instead, he seemed to be interested, rubbing his head against his palm. "Fawkes likes you very much," Dumbledore suddenly said, holding a small jar. "It took some time to find this. This is the tea from the east that you gave to Professor Sprout. She loved it, but she wasn't used to it, so she gave me some." Dumbledore walked to the long table with the teapot. The surrounding utensils moved on their own, teacups and a teapot in place, and hot water flew out from another place. "It tastes quite good, but I'm not used to it. I think Western black tea is more suitable for me," Dumbledore said with a smile. At this time, 2 cups of tea were brewed. One flew to Guan Qiong, and the other was held in Dumbledore's hands, steaming. He took a small sip, his brow furrowed, and his face twisted. "Well, I'm still not used to it. I tried adding sugar, but it tasted strange," Dumbledore said with some regret, setting the cup down. Guan Qiong blew away the tea foam, inhaled the faint aroma, and took a sip. It was bitter, perhaps from the excessive tea leaves, and Guan Qiong's face contorted for a moment. But after he swallowed it, a sweet fragrance rose from his throat, making him feel warm all over. "It's obvious that it's something very good, but it's a pity that I can't enjoy it," Dumbledore said with a smile, his voice a little lonely. "It's just a matter of different eating habits. I'm not used to eating those bacon and sausages either." A light appeared, revealing Guan Qiong's words. "Is that so? Perhaps we could consider having the kitchen try some Eastern recipes. There are some very good ones there that the students could try," Dumbledore said with a smile, looking at the light. He was very pleased with his student. His innovations in magic alone surpassed most wizards, not to mention his diligence and love of learning. However, as Dumbledore looked at Guan Qiong before him, his mind drifted back to a past time. Long ago, he had also met a student with extraordinary talent, just like Guan Qiong. He had high hopes for that child, believing that he could succeed him. But in the end, he was wrong. The child possessed immense talent, but lacked a character to match it. He held only malice, completely unaware of and indifferent to the beauty of the world. He ultimately failed because of this, because of the magic of love. Dumbledore looked at Guan Qiong, a thoughtful look in his azure eyes. When he first met Guan Qiong, he had been captivated by the gleam in her eyes, filled with love for the world. Despite her disability, she embraced it in every way she could. So, against all odds, he admitted Guan Qiong to the school because the child's eyes so closely resembled his own youth. That same thirst for exploration, that yearning for freedom, was exactly the same as his own. However, after a year of study, especially after learning the secrets and power of magic, he wasn't sure if Guan Qiong still retained that same character and love for the world. But judging by her appearance in front of the mirror of Eris, Guan Qiong seemed relatively unchanged, merely more mature. Dumbledore looked at Guan Qiong. Fawkes had already jumped onto the table in front of Guan Qiong, gently rubbing his hand, letting him caress her. A glint flashed in his eyes, and he slowly spoke. "I have a question I'd like you to answer, child." Guan Qiong put down her teacup, her face serious, and looked at Dumbledore. Dumbledore pondered for a moment, then spoke. "What is magic to you?" He had once asked Tom, who would later become Voldemort, this question, and he remembered Tom's answer. "It is power, Professor Dumbledore," Tom said, his eyes blazing. At that time, he didn't understand the true meaning behind Tom's answer. Only after everything happened did he understand Tom's intentions. Magic is power, and power is a tool for ruling and enslaving the world. Guan Qiong fell into deep thought at this question. What was magic to him? An illumination spell that replaced speech? A magical vision that allowed him to see strange patterns? A special softening spell? A powerful fire spell? No, these were too small. Magic must be something much greater. He recalled his past year, battling trolls, befriending Hermione, reading, learning new spells, punishing Malfoy, taming Norma, protecting unicorns, and navigating the Philosopher's Stone. Were these things he'd experienced before? Was this the life he'd had in his previous life, with 16 years of study and 8 years of part-time work? Compared to that day-to-day, predictable existence, this year seemed as exciting as 30 years in his previous life. So, what was magic to him? Guan Qiong looked up at Dumbledore. He extended a pen and wrote word by word in the air. Points of light appeared out of thin air, becoming answers. "It's the new world, Professor." Guan Qiong's eyes, as dark as the night sky, held a sense of exploration and yearning for a new world, just as they had when Dumbledore first met him. Dumbledore's face lit up with a smile as bright as a flower as he watched Guan Qiong's answer. He laughed so hard that the whole room trembled. "That's a good answer," Dumbledore smiled, his heart relaxed. A child like him would never go astray. "My child, I have no more questions," Dumbledore said to Guan Qiong, his crescent eyes gleaming with a smile. "You can go back now. Of course, don't tell anyone about what happened in the room on the 4th floor. It was just a simple test, and I'm glad you passed, but please don't help other students cheat." Guan Qiong nodded, teased Fawkes for a moment, and stood up to leave. Behind him, Dumbledore patted Fawkes' head and asked softly, "He's a good boy, isn't he?" Fawkes nodded and chirped. Chapter 74 Acting. Dumbledore's question didn't faze Guan Qiong. He meant what he said to Dumbledore. To him, magic was a new world to explore and discover, a truly fascinating one. He loved and enjoyed this kind of life and decided to continue. He couldn't work it part-time anyway. He'd done enough in his past life. He had to enjoy the blessings of Western society in this one. Don't let your imagination run wild. He was talking about the magical world. Life returned to normal. There was still a week left until the end of the school year. A week later, the end-of-year banquet would arrive, along with their report cards, and then it would be time to leave Hogwarts, marking the beginning of summer vacation. 3 days before the banquet, Dumbledore left Hogwarts for London. Guan Qiong saw him leave, dressed in his white robes, moving slowly and leisurely. Guan Qiong didn't know if he was truly leaving or just pretending, but even if he was, Dumbledore would have a way to quickly return to school. Guan Qiong didn't remember much about it, but she had some inkling of it. In other words, even if Voldemort really did cause trouble, he would be able to return immediately, whether he was in London or New York. That very day, the mood among the trio changed noticeably. Each of them wore a worried expression, sighing occasionally, and clenching their fists slightly, as if with determination. Hermione periodically glanced at Guan Qiong, as if about to say something, but each time she paused to calm herself. Although Guan Qiong was reading, he was fully aware of Hermione's movements. He also understood what the trio was up to. It was clear that they knew the origins of Hagrid's dragon egg and that Hagrid had been tricked into using Fluffy. With Dumbledore away from school, the Philosopher's Stone was in a precarious position. Snape could take it at any moment and offer it to Voldemort. Harry and the others resolved to go that night to obtain the Philosopher's Stone and keep it safe. They had considered the consequences, but compared to the dangers facing the wizarding world and the safety of the world, they felt it was nothing. Guan Qiong knew what Harry and the others were planning, but he had no intention of getting involved. He'd already been there, even held the Philosopher's Stone in his hands, and now he had no interest. Dumbledore clearly had his own agenda. He'd told him not to tell anyone about what happened on the 4th floor, clearly waiting for Harry to take the bait. Guan Qiong naturally wouldn't let himself be fooled. That evening, Guan Qiong returned to his dorm early, thinking he could sleep through the next day and everything would be over. But in the middle of the night, someone shook him awake. "Qiong! Qiong! Wake up! Wake up!" It was Neville, dressed in pajamas, shaking Guan Qiong nervously until he slightly opened his eyes and yawned loudly. "What's wrong?" A light beamed reluctantly, forming a distorted sentence in the air. "Harry and Ron are going out. It's too late. Come with me." Neville, finding the courage and strength, pulled Guan Qiong out. Guan Qiong didn't notice, and he actually pulled her out of bed. "Oh, no, what am I doing?" It wasn't until Neville pulled him in front of the common room portrait hole, blocking Ron's path to Hermione, Harry, and more, that he regained some consciousness. He looked at his bare feet with a helpless expression. Looking at the nervous trio before him, and Neville, who was even more nervous. Standing in their way, Gwen scratched his head. "Neville, what are you trying to do?" "Get out of the way," Ron shouted, his eyes vacantly glancing at Gwen. If Gwen tried to stop them, they wouldn't make it through today. Even with 3 more of them, they wouldn't be Gwen's match. "You can't leave. You'll be caught, and then you'll lose points, and Gryffindor won't win the House Cup," Neville said with all his might. He pulled Gwen back, pointing at her, and said, "June worked so hard to help you get your points back. Now you've just barely surpassed Slytherin in our first. Gwen and I won't let you go out and lose points." He seemed unusually brave at this moment, a determined expression on his face. But this matter is extremely important. It concerns the safety of the entire wizarding world, Harry said earnestly. He looked at Gwen, who stood beside Neville, with a troubled expression. He couldn't guarantee that Gwen would let them go. Gwen had always disbelieved Snape would steal the Philosopher's Stone. But Gwen simply watched them, without moving. Hermione then stepped forward. She looked at Neville, but instead of trying to dissuade him, she turned to Gwen and spoke. Gwen, I know you don't believe us, but you must let us go tonight. If Snape gets the Philosopher's Stone, you know who will return, and the entire wizarding world will be in great danger. A rare pleading touch crossed Hermione's face, her amber brown eyes gleaming with hope. I believe in Professor Snape. Gwen held out his hands, as if feeling a little cold, and rubbed them together. A stream of light appeared, signaling a stance. Hermione gritted her teeth, a little angry, unsure what to do. It was here that Harry pointed at Guan Qiong and shouted, Qiong doesn't have a wand. He can't cast a spell. The atmosphere suddenly changed. Guan Qiong stopped rubbing his hands, and his expression changed slightly. He was half asleep, his wand still lying on the bed. Qiong, I'm sorry, Hermione said, drawing her wand and pointing it at Guan Qiong, shouting, Petrify. Guan Qiong, with his magical perspective activated, could see Hermione's magic radiating from her wand, forming a chain of magical circuits that threatened to wrap around his body. The trio stared at Guan Qiong, their faces tense. Neville also stared at Guan Qiong nervously. The next second, Guan Qiong lowered his hands to his sides, then straightened his legs and stood upright, like a stone statue. Did it work? Ron asked nervously. Hermione looked at Guan Qiong, her eyes lighting up with a hint of disbelief. It must have worked. Great, Hermione, you actually beat Qiong, Harry said excitedly. Neville watched in disbelief. In his mind, Jean was the strongest of the young wizards. After all, he could lift Malfoy into the air and then drop him. But now, Neville stared at Jean, motionless, and gritted his teeth, stepping forward. No, you can't leave until you defeat me again, Petrify. Neville quickly assumed the same posture as Jean, only his body stiffened even more. He swayed a few times before falling to the ground with a resounding crash, like real stone. Hermione sighed helplessly, sheathed her wand, and looking at Jean, who stood there, she walked over and gave him a soft hug. Thank you, Hermione whispered, then left with Harry and Ron. Chapter 75 Experience. After Hermione, Harry, and Ron crawled out of the Gryffindor passage, Guan Qiong's eyes fluttered, and he stretched. While Hermione's magic was decent, it was still immature. Her surge of magical power could block Voldemort's weak legilimency, and certainly could block less powerful spells like that. As for what happened just now, it was pure acting. He didn't want to stop the trio. He could even say he was looking forward to their action. This was a rare opportunity for growth. Dumbledore or Snape were probably there to protect them, so there wouldn't be any danger. Where else could he find such a good opportunity? If he hadn't been there before, he would have even been tempted to follow. He looked at Neville, who glared at him, and after a moment's thought, his magical power surged out, shattering his magical circuits. There was no special technique, just an abundance of magical power. 10 times the magical power could shatter even the strongest circuits. Of course, the more complex the circuit, the stronger it was. This was only possible with a simple spell like this, cast by a young wizard. Neville's body was no longer stiff, and he let out a long breath, as if he hadn't reacted yet. Guan Qiong patted his back to help him breathe more smoothly. We couldn't stop them, Qiong, Neville said softly, a little frustrated, looking at the empty common room. He thought that if he pulled Guan Qiong over, he would be able to stop them, but he didn't expect that he was so anxious that he actually forgot his wand. It was all his fault. He really couldn't do anything well. Don't worry, Neville, nothing will happen to them, Guan Qiong said. But they will cause Gryffindor to lose points, Neville insisted. It was obvious that if they held on for 2 more days, they would be able to defeat Slytherin and win the House Cup. He even thought about choosing a good seat that day and secretly glanced at Malfoy's frustrated expression. Don't worry, I promise you, there will be no problem, and Gryffindor will not lose points, and may even gain a lot of points, Guan Qiong said confidently. Really? Okay, I believe you, Neville whispered. At this point, he had no other choice. He didn't dare go out and chase Harry and the others back. It was late at night. What if he ran into Ghost? Even though they were all familiar faces, they were still scary, weren't they? Oh, right, there's one more thing. Halfway through the walk, Guan Qiong suddenly remembered something. Neville tilted his head in confusion. You're very brave, Neville, a Gryffindor indeed. Of course, it would be nice if you could come alone next time, Guan Qiong encouraged. Neville's eyes lit up. Really? You think I'm a Gryffindor? Neville stuttered. Of course, I deserve it. Guan Qiong gave him a thumbs up. After all, not everyone had the courage to stand up to the trio, a super student, a top celebrity, and a powerful family, 3 older brothers. And Neville had the nerve to pull Guan Qiong out of bed, not afraid of angering him. That was truly a brave move. Of course, it was rather reckless. He should have gone to the professor. He didn't need to go himself. The fat lady could have been more comfortable running around the castle's picture frames. Thank you, Neville's steps became more brisk, his face brimming with joy and excitement. Even as he settled into bed, his eyes wide and the corners of his mouth lifted unconsciously. After Guan Qiong finished praising him, she returned to her own bed, sighed a sigh of relief, and closed her eyes. It was so late at night, and if you don't get enough sleep, you won't grow taller. A quiet night followed. When Guan Qiong woke the next day, she was surprised to hear that Harry and Ron had been hospitalized. Ron wasn't seriously injured, having fainted after falling from a chess piece. He'd regained consciousness, but Harry remained unconscious, and the cause was unknown. He wasn't physically injured. However, Madame Pomfrey said Harry would wake up in the next couple of days, much to the relief of Ron and Hermione. After breakfast, Guan Qiong visited the trio in the hospital. By the way, let's hear if the story unfolds differently from the book. When they arrived at the hospital, Harry was lying in bed, as was Ron. Madame Pomfrey had told him to rest and not get out of bed until tomorrow. Hermione wasn't there, she didn't know where she'd gone. Oh, June, you're here, Ron said, a little embarrassed to see Guan Jun, but since no one else was there, he had to say hello. Come to see you guys. Guan Jun opened her magical vision, looked at Harry, then at Ron. Nothing was wrong, basically the same as before. Thank you, Ron said dryly. Without Harry and Hermione around, he felt a little hesitant to speak to Guan Jun. And last night, in order to leave, they'd attack Guan Jun with a petrifying curse. Oh my god, Guan Jun wouldn't hang all 3 of them together. Guan Jun looked at the bewildered Ron, confused as to what he was thinking. She pulled a chair over and sat down, asking, "What happened last night?" At Guan Jun's question, Ron's eyes suddenly lit up, his fear gone. Thinking of the adventure of the previous night, he spoke excitedly. "Oh, my god, Joan, you won't believe this. Last night's adventure was truly thrilling. At the beginning, we encountered Fluffy, the 3-headed dog. We put him to sleep with music. Harry played the flute. Of course, I could do it just as well. I think Harry plays pretty much the same as me. The big dog wouldn't be able to tell the difference. Then we encountered the Devil's Ivy, the one Professor Sprout taught us. Of course, that's what Hermione told me. I forgot all about it as soon as the exam was over. Hermione used a fire spell to drive it away, then we came across a room full of keys. The keys had wings and were flying in the sky. Harry, Hermione, and I worked together on our broomsticks to grab the key that could open the door, and then there was level 4, Ron puffed out his chest, his face beaming with pride, his eyes almost as bright as the sun outside. Level 4 was wizard chess. Ron led us to victory, but he himself was knocked unconscious by a chess piece. Hermione's voice suddenly came from behind, a hint of fatigue. "Oh, Hermione, don't be like this," Ron said dejectedly. Guan Qiong looked back, and Hermione was still the same as before, with no physical injuries, and her life circuits were normal in all aspects, but her eyes looked a little tired. In her hand, she was holding a book as thick as 2 bricks of the city wall. It was obvious that she had just been to the library. Facing Guan Qiong's eyes, Hermione tilted her head slightly, a little embarrassed. Later, Harry and I went to the next level. The troll was solved, and then it was a logical reasoning level. I deduced the answer. Harry went to protect the Philosopher's Stone. And I came back to save Ron and ask Professor Dumbledore for help. She pulled over a chair, sat next to Guan Qiong, and continued to talk about what happened last night. End of this chapter. Thank you so much for reading until the end. Don't forget to give it a like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, Subscription or donation encourages us to continue. Thank you all. See you in the next video.